Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream Q&A, but mostly Star Wars Visions, the Ninth Jedi discussion. So Star Wars news, as we know, has been very here and there. We haven't had much of it. D23 is coming up, as Brandon mentioned in the chat. So we hopefully will have some stuff to talk about this weekend or maybe beginning of next week will probably be when we do a show, but we had a big, semi-big thing happen in the world of Star Wars, right? Nobody's talking about it. We're here to give at least a little bit of like a PSA that this is out, talk about and discuss and review Star Wars Visions Presents The Ninth Jedi. They got to come up with a better title than that. It's too many words. But we're going to talk about it because this was a solid Star Wars release that nobody's watching, nobody's talking about, and it deserves at least some love because it's not life-changing, but it is something that people who have been wanting Star Wars to jump into anime or Star Wars to just jump into new, different things. This is the type of thing that if we don't get very often in the world of Star Wars. So it's exciting to talk about that, and we have been hyping this up for years. Honestly, since 2021, there's been rumors about Star Wars getting its own anime, and then with the announcement last year at Celebration, it felt like something big was coming, and they've just kind of not marketed this thing at all, and nobody knows it's out. So we're going to talk about it, and hopefully, I did start a poll earlier that I ended because it just seemed futile, like nobody's voting in it, and then also nobody's watched this. So we did have at the end of poll results 2 votes. One person said it was good. One said they hadn't watched it yet, which I assume is kind of the majority of people when it comes to the Ninth Jedi. So we're excited to talk about it. We'll try to keep our thoughts fairly spoiler free because I know most of the people watching this and most of the people who might find this stream probably haven't seen it, and they want to know if it's worth their time. So we're going to give you guys our thoughts on whether this is worth your time, whether it's worth checking out the latest Star Wars series, and hopefully you guys get a chance to check it out if you haven't already. Disney is opening this up to more people than usual. This is on both Disney Plus and Hulu. So if you are a Hulu subscriber, whether it's for the live TV element or just Hulu is free with so many different deals and subscriptions through other things too, you have a chance to check this out even if you're not a Disney Plus subscriber. So that's another thing that I think a lot of people don't know about the Ninth Jedi is it's far more readily available for people to check out, but yet still nobody's really watching it. So we're going to break it down here. Again, we're going to keep it spoiler free for the most part so you guys have a chance to check it out yourselves. And then if we still have time after our discussion there, we'll move on to some news, talking about a little bit of the D23 possibilities for Star Wars here moving into next week. And then we also had the announcement, or I think this was announced before, but the confirmation of the Star Wars Marvel crossover that we are getting next year. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then we'll take your guys' questions for a little bit of the stream too. This won't be a typical Q&A. I think we're going to save a lot of the Q&A elements overall for next week's stream or whenever we talk about the next news. But specifically Ninth Jedi, that's the focus of our show tonight. So without the rest of the preamble, let's get into Ninth Jedi. This is a series from Production IG, who did also make the 2 episodes in Visions Volume 1 and Visions Volume 3. If you're somebody who hasn't checked out all the other Visions stuff so far, you really only need to have seen the first episode of The Ninth Jedi in Visions Volume 1, which has been far more readily watched than Volume 3. And so if you're somebody who hasn't checked out Ninth Jedi in 5 years, I can't believe we're saying 5 years since Visions Volume 1, but if you haven't checked out The Ninth Jedi since Visions Volume 1, there's definitely room for you to just jump back into the story. I think that's one of the great things about the Ninth Jedi series. I'm going to pass it over to you first, Senik. What were your thoughts on the Ninth Jedi as a series as a whole? And let's do it in our typical kind of review style way. Let's start talking about here the world building, the story, the way this whole production came to be, and just the quality of the Ninth Jedi overall as a product, and then we'll get to the characters after.
Yeah, I think when the original Ninth Jedi debuted, definitely sent some ripples in the fandom. Definitely made people be like, "Yes, this is something I want to treat as canon almost because it's so far ahead in the future." There's enough that feels familiar, but has its own inspirations, obviously from Japan. But just felt like there was a lot of iconography and just strong characters overall, like Lakara. We had everything with Juro and his introduction and the twist of that introduction. Just a really strong standalone episode. Second episode that came out in Vision Season 3, Child of Hope. I don't think it was as strong, but I certainly did enjoy a lot more of like the first introductions to world building. A very interesting spaceship. Teto was a very adorable droid and everything. So that was good. It just had some weird CGI lightsaber dueling as opposed to the really nicely done hand animated stuff. And either way, this getting its own proper series, it felt almost like a given. It felt like it was going to be one of the three, and for sure it was going to be this one because things had just been progressing so well within the fandom, even if visions had faltered and kind of fallen off from the radar for a lot of people by the time of the third season. But uh, I did struggle with this series. I was hoping for a little bit more of a punch throughout. I felt like I got a lot of that in the second half. The second half to me blows out the first half. The first half feels intentionally generic at times and unintentionally generic at times. I just didn't really find a lot of like the visuals to be super appealing to me, like the spaceship designs and all that. Felt very Knights of the Old Republic inspired with the scale and just like how the main ship looks like, what Nawam's kind of ships look like. And I thought all that was interesting, but then there was a lot of Darth Vader imagery, a lot of stuff that felt very original trilogy inspired. Even moments that felt like, oh, like we're gonna go to like a Geonosis or something. We kind of just skip by it, and I'm like, okay, I get it. Like you want to make it its own thing, its own entire interpretation, and I think while that worked for me in those individual episodes, once you open it up to a series, even if it's not canon, I was kinda hoping for the world building to at least touch on points. It doesn't have to outright explicitly say we're going to, like, a Coruscant and all that, but when you open one of your opening shots is, like, a destroyed Senate building and all that, I'm like, "Okay, maybe there's gonna be, like, some, like, sort of interpretation of a far flung out future where many things are the same, a lot of character hero journeys are the same, but things are different, things are remixed, something of, like, a Japanese version of the Star Wars Legacy comics. That's kind of what I thought everything was primed for with those 2 standalone episodes, but those first 4 episodes, I didn't really love too much. I liked what was happening, but kind of a lot of the imagery, a lot of the inspirations. I mean, I felt like there was definitely a lot of Tolkien inspiration with pretty much like minor dwarves and elves that are on their own secluded planet of sorts, right? The whole twist of the first half that everything's building up to didn't really capture me as much as I would have liked. But then the second half really felt like, okay, we've returned to our groove. We returned to making things interesting and different and taking stuff that you expect and then changing it enough or keeping us on our toes. And I found the second half just much stronger. I thought not only were all the characters a little bit more realized, because that was one of my biggest problems in this series. I just found that a lot of the characters that were introduced already in the two original shorts kind of got shortchanged here. It almost felt very sequel trilogy in the sense of as we progressed into the trilogy, we started narrowing down on just like Rey and Kylo. That's kind of how that first half felt like to me. There was not enough detail for some of the supporting cast, and the ones that were already there were just kind of like, bygones be bygones. Let's ignore them, just assume they're just part of the cast, and even completely keep them away from the main story at points. So that wasn't all that great. But then once we got into that second half, everything started really clicking. I found that each episode the planets were a little bit more diverse. I was definitely enjoying a little bit more of Kara and a lot more of what she was interacting with, a lot more alien species that I felt were truly more Star Wars alien inspired. Yeah, it ends strong. I'll give this series that. I think that back half, I very much felt like that was spiritually in line with those first 2 shorts, especially that final episode. You could practically watch it on its own and not have to care about anything other than maybe the original Ninth Jedi short or maybe just the 2 original shorts, and I think it still works quite well on its own. But, yeah, I don't know. There were just things that I was like, "Oh, you're getting really close to that, like, peak and high of those first 2 shorts," and then a lot more of, like, the flaws I definitely noticed in the second short kinda were built in and baked into, like, the imagery and just the pacing, and some of the depth of the characters was just missing in a way that I was like, "Ah, but this is what made Night Jedi so appealing to so many of us." But it ends strong. I really did like that. I think the imagery got cleaned up and sharpened up, and what was introduced, what was reintroduced, all really worked a lot better for me. Enough newness that felt like, "Okay, I could see this in 203 year 100 years past the Rise of Skywalker," as opposed to a lot of the first half feeling like this could be just the prequels, honestly, and it felt like there were just too many humanoids and stuff like that. But I did like a lot of it. I did like once everyone was put together. I did like the action. That was one thing that also bothered me in the first half. I just found some of the lightsaber doing just kind of average and met like, it seemed like they saved everything for those last couple episodes, especially the final. I found like, "Oh my god, this was just what I felt was I was lacking in that first half." First half just felt like any other studio, but this is production IG. There's a certain standard to be expected here, and from what we've already seen. So, yeah, I mean, there were things that I think this could have really taken a huge step forward for animation and especially Japanese anime and what Star Wars can get into. But this definitely felt like a series that maybe they had closer to 4 to 5 episodes of, like, really, really strong stuff for me, and then they kinda stretched it out over 8 episodes and kinda lose some interest, kinda starts feeling episodic in a way that this series really shouldn't, and for some strange reason, it does have that Disney Plus issue of feels like a movie that's kind of been stretched out over 8 episodes at times. But if I'm gonna watch a movie version of this, I would definitely watch the back 4 episodes.
I have similar and very differing thoughts on the overall project because I do think that the Ninth Jedi was in a lot of ways exactly what I was wanting from this series, from the characters, from the concepts that were introduced in Visions. I think as a successor to especially Visions Volume 1, this fits right in line with that style visually and the action and overall the focus around the Jedi specifically that we got in Visions Volume 1. So I did enjoy all of that, and I did enjoy deconstructing some of these characters and going in deeper on what the Jedi are like at this time. But one of the first things it says when this show starts with a little bit of a narration is the Jedi and the Sith are gone. This is a new era. And that's where this starts to be a bit disappointing, is instead of going in on that concept, trying to hammer home what a galaxy without the Jedi and without the Sith is like, we immediately just get a bunch of Jedi and a bunch of Sith characters and they're fighting. And that's where the familiarity can't be shaken for this ultimate series, which I get. Again, like, I did like this series. I think it's a good series. And if you are somebody who's interested in Visions, but not necessarily in the anthology style of storytelling, I think you're going to dig this. Like, this is a pretty good anime to check out for beginners' first anime. It's also a good anime to check out with, like, what can we do with some Star Wars concepts telling a linear story in anime. And I think all of those things are there, but kind of the criticism I had towards tons of the Vision shorts, and then also some of the ones that I had when you reflect on what a lot of these Japanese studios are trying to do with Star Wars concepts, is we still haven't found the, like, perfect marriage of the two. It's either really anime with very bare bones, basic, cliche Star Wars storytelling, or it's really out there with new, bold, creative concepts, but then lacks some of the feeling and charm and world building of what Star Wars is. And so this to me rides the line kind of in between, where and that was always kind of the best thing about the Ninth Jedi, was that it felt like it had the most potential, the most promise, because this did feel like something that could exist in the Star Wars universe in the far future. But I wanted more of that. And so I think story, plotting, all of that is unfortunately to me kind of the weakest part of this series. And that's very much so synonymous with the cliche main story beat that they go with for like the villain and what the villain's trying to do. It's something that Star Wars fans have been complaining about for 50 years almost, and then we still do it again. So like what they really don't help themselves with is they go with some of the most cliche Star Wars plot lines, some of the most cliche Star Wars MacGuffins and villain motivations. But then sometimes this really gets under the skin of what a Jedi would be like in a lawless galaxy where there's no rigid structure. This is very Legends-esque in some of those ways, where you have, and what I mean by that is like early in Legends when Zahn was writing the Thrawn trilogy, and when you got some of those 90s Bantam era books, even early New Jedi Order, you had these ideas about Jedi that were all made up from the authors, and it was based on the inspirations for George Lucas, very much so, in feudal Japan culture and the way of the samurai and all that type of stuff. Also some ideas from classic sci-fi tropes and other fantasy tropes. You had these authors merging all of these ideas together to create what they felt like the Jedi would have been in their prime. And then George Lucas comes in with the prequels and kind of shatters almost all of that with, no, this is how they were like. And you can like one or you can like the other. But this felt very much so Bantam era Star Wars inspired, in that it tries to take what was a very limited Star Wars at the time, only 3 movies, and use the broken remains of the Jedi that's in the original trilogy with Luke, with Yoda, with Obi-Wan, and tell a story about how they could rise again out of those broken remains. Whereas post prequel, we know what the rigid structure of the Jedi was like. And so I think this has the idea of what it could do with the concept of the Jedi in the far future, where there hasn't been Jedi for a long time. But then a lot of times it still broaches that familiarity that we've seen in the prequels, that we've seen in the original trilogy, without going to that next level. And I think that's what's always slightly disappointing with the Ninth Jedi. Is it's an easy watch. It's a fast, breezy, exciting, fun series, but it never takes that next step. And that's what we've been hoping for, that they've promised kind of since Volume 1. And so I think that remains easily the most disappointing part of the series. But visually, this is still a very strong series. Lightsaber duels, especially in the back half, are very memorable and exciting. I do like the whole lightsaber color changing concept. Like there are some interesting ideas in here with a lot of different typical Star Wars iconography, typical Star Wars style storytelling. But at the end of the day, this is in some ways as simple as it gets when it comes to Jedi and the light and the dark, with a little less nuance than I think the story initially wants to set up. And the one thing I felt like I kind of agree and disagree with you about too is I actually feel like this series feels like it's lacking ideas, because it feels like 2 seasons in one in a lot of ways. It feels like it's completely split halfway down the middle. After the 4th episode, the structure completely changes. And because of that, it feels like they truncated certain parts of the storytelling, where maybe there were extra episodes to explore certain character, which is a very traditional anime style structure for a season. You usually have a season 1 that kind of introduces all the main characters, and almost every main character gets their own episode, where they showcase what they can do and what they bring to the ensemble, and all of that type of stuff is here. But it's more limited than it could have been if the first 4 episodes were 8 episodes, and then the last 4 episodes were also 8 episodes, and the last 4 have the meat of the story, but they have less character. First 4 have a lot of the world building and initial setup, but there's just a moment that just doesn't feel like it clicks, where you transition from stage 1 characters to stage 2 characters. And I think that's where the ultimate structure of this is a little bit frustrating, because there are, again, concepts here that could have made a really exciting 16 episode show, but I do think they're truncated and then shed for all their extra material to kind of their base form. And that's where, in some ways, like Sonic was mentioning, it starts to feel like it could use even less than 8 episodes. As I personally felt like I could see moments in here where I think they had more ideas than they were allowed to do with this specific strict 8 episode format. And with a lot of new anime too, this has kind of become a trend. It used to always be 24 to 27 episodes for your new season with anime. Recently, a lot of these shows have been 8 to 12. So you wonder if it's a production IG concept where they're like, no, this is now how anime is done. We need 8 episodes, strict, structured. We don't know if we're getting a season 2, so we're going to have to cram all this story in. Or if this is a Disney Plus standard, because they've forced people a lot of times into this rigid 8 episode structure that we've seen so often on Disney Plus and streaming on Disney Plus. I'm not sure, but either way, I do think it needed at least in that 10 episode range, or to be shrunk down to the 6 episode range to find its happy spot. And I think the show would be a lot better for that. Let's talk about the characters, because these are mostly the same characters that we're introduced to in Volume 1's episode of the Ninth Jedi. But there are a lot of new characters, like the main villain, who's introduced for this series. So, Sona, give me some of your standout characters, and which ones were your favorites throughout the whole show?
I think for me, I found most of the characters to be good. Not many really hit great. There were moments of greatness for all of them. I think Kara obviously has the most development from the start, from Ninth Jedi onwards. So I found that even though I did struggle with her a bit in those first 4 episodes, and I did feel like they kind of rushed through a lot of parts in the last 4 with her, she still does stand out. She still does feel like she's, even if a little abbreviated, has found that specific direction that she's looking for. Um, I think Jira, her father, is definitely a lot more of a standout for me, because the status quo of him from that very first episode to what it is now, him kind of being the linchpin to this.
I think we lost Sonic here for a second. Let's see. Okay, well, we're going to try to get Sonic back. In the meantime, I'll give my character a breakdown here. So, for me, I had a lot of similar thoughts to what Sonic was starting to say. Kara is the standout character of the show, but like I mentioned in the first part, there's just this moment where a lot of things change for her, and it does feel too quick. And I think that's where this show could have used an extra 2 or 3 episodes in the middle to pad that out and help explore her as a Jedi, getting trained and getting taken on a journey. Whereas she's kind of, in a lot of ways, a Luke Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker style main character protagonist who just kind of picks everything up fairly quickly, has more training than maybe a Rey, because her father was a Jedi. They mentioned that she was trained by him growing up. She has a master in this, but we do see her take massive leaps in terms of her power scaling from early on into later. And I think that's something they could have absolutely cleaned up as the series went on. So we got Sonic back. The cat ate him. I'll pass it back to you for your comment on Kara.
Yeah, I mean, I picked up on some of that. Like you said, just some leaps that are taken, even if there are notes in the story and straight up dialogue that says like, "Hey, this is why she's capable of doing this." That was all fine there. I specifically struggled with the episode of her kind of on the run because I just felt like that whole arc that happens there for her was just super rapid between that episode and the following episode. And I found the following episode to be much stronger, but it was a little bit of an eye roll because I was like, okay, I just have to accept these things. And then like just the way it changes like the story and straight up the cast of the story too. I was like, oh, okay, like, I guess we are going back to that, like, original short character and kinda bring it full circle, but in a very rapidly changed sense, and that's kinda where, like, it does feel like there are some shortcuts with some of these characters, especially when it comes to the whole, like, lightsaber color changing. I get that it's a very quick way to visualize how your characters are changing, how they're identifying, but I found it used simplistically and very almost silly like in a lot of ways. Uh, that was kind of what my problem there because you could see even if stuff was truncated with what we see out of Kara, I still was like, okay, that's pretty good. But then there's also some things that felt a little contradictory between what happens with her and her lightsaber and with her father and his lightsaber. I just was like, "Oh, okay." Like, I wish we could have seen a little extra scene of her father, especially with like the big conclusion to her character and what she's saying and what she's grown into, what she's evolved past in a way, right? And I thought the final fight that she has and the concept of that fight and what she's really leaned into the Jedi side of all these things was pretty solid, right? I thought that was actually like what Ninth Jedi had always promised, like, take things that feel familiar and then take it in a different direction that Star Wars hasn't seen, even if it doesn't feel massive. But it's like, if you take something from, like, Brand New Day, for example, small potatoes, big potato ideas, right? The big potato idea might be one huge, massive thing, and that's not something that maybe production IG is gonna be able to pull off in a non-canon show, but a lot of these smaller ideas just filtered through the first 2 shorts, filtered through the series, I thought was there in her character. It was just picked too early or just was left away and kept simplified. There were things like that that kind of just threw me off about the characters. Another character I did like was Ethan. I will say I did not really appreciate how he was used in the first half. I really enjoyed Ethan in the original shorts, and even if he had a diminished role in the second short, it felt like okay, it's because they're trying to balance him against the rest of the cast. But he's kind of MIA in a way, intentionally from the story, and I always thought that there was a potential for him and Kara, especially being, like, the 2 youngest in the group, to really be able to grow. It almost kind of felt like a Finn and Rey situation where it's like, when you did put them together, there was, like, some really electrifying character development. You could see the differences in their Jedi philosophies, you could see what it means to be masterless Jedi for both of them, but you could see the ingenuity, you could see the different ways that they work together, work separately, and embody what it means to be a Jedi. And I liked what was done with him for plot. I just felt like we could have spent some time with him, spent time with Homan, for example. Like he's just there to just look like a kind of like a groundhog turned slightly human, right? And I was like, okay, cool. I like that he's still around, but what does he end up doing, right? Um, Beto, the Jedi hunter from the very first short, really takes a big step here in the second half of the story. Again, a little too rushed for me in the way he's like introduced into the cast in a different way. I liked it, but again, this kind of came down to the whole lightsaber color system just being a simple visual cue for where people stand and all that. And it's almost like semi acknowledged by the writers and the animators too in that final episode because everybody's like very quick to judge too. But I thought he added an interesting strain of like heroism and just banter and dynamic. I think the whole group as a whole, even when they're introduced as like, oh, not exactly like on the same side as Juro and Kara and the whole crew, they still eventually lined up and were like, yeah, we're just doing these things. We just happen to do them on different fronts. Beto, it always kind of felt like he's like, "Oh man, what am I doing here?" It's like, "Not this again. Like this will not make any sense and all that." And I appreciated that perspective. I just felt that it was a little short for me, and I think he would have been a character if you'd given him the back half of the series, especially since, like you said, it works as a reset. There's a whole new narration to start that fifth episode. I think he could have become something even more fantastic. There's a lot of like growth in those two episodes, but I needed more, but I do think he was a standout. I think he achieved something that maybe like a Toffler, for example, despite having a very strong, interesting origin, location, and all that. She kind of gets reduced. She kind of gets disappeared as long as the first merchant, Doman, who's also ex Jedi. Like all these characters, and that's the frustrating part for me. It's like they all actually start off from like a very interesting source. They all feel like they have something more to give, and then they don't have much more. And that's kind of that was my problem. It's like, okay, everything got narrowed down, stuff like that. I know we were focusing on things that we liked about characters, and I have been a little bit more mixed on stuff. I will say the one negative I wanna bring up is Nawam. I didn't find him to be as compelling. I think the first 4 episodes, he kinda works quite literally with his mask as like a Darth Vader, Kylo Ren looking character, and then when he's unmasked, I'm like, "Okay, now we're gonna, like, really get into him and all that." But I really don't wanna spoil it, but a lot of his reasoning is, 1, straight up childish, and 2, it's silly. Like, once you see, like, characters like Cardinal that, like, kinda break him down as a character, you're like, "Really?" Like, sure, he's very capable and he's done a lot of things, but what like, why? Like, why would you do this? And why would you believe in something that was just a moment, right? Like, I understand for a backstory purpose, that could be a life-changing moment, but his reasoning always kind of felt like kinda dumbed down to, like, I just liked how it looked, right? And I really don't wanna spoil what he finds or what he, like, looks at that really changes his perspective on things, but I was like, "That's it?" And I think they were really trying to and probably felt very inspired by Kylo Ren, but even if there are flaws in how Kylo Ren is executed, especially in Episode 9, you still see all the markers. You still see that really strong development of the dyad. You still see where childhood neglect and trauma and misunderstanding shape him. You still see, just because it's Adam Driver, how impactful just expression can be. And for a character that really is anti-expression, motivations felt lacking to me. I think if he was a better villain, every episode would have been really buoyed. But the stuff that he really gets to do other than the action also was very much like rehashes of stuff that we've seen in the sequels, in the original trilogy, in the prequels, and that's what bummed me out because I was like, there's a lot of potential in this whole world with all the heroes and all the world building. And then when we finally are introduced to our threat, I found him to be very one dimensional and then outright silly. Again, like every character in the series, I think by the end you're like, "Oh, wow, I can finally see something there. I can finally see something that's burgeoning." But that's the problem. I felt like finally he was getting started into becoming a really solid step towards a character, but there was 5 minutes left. And that was my biggest frustration. I think he's probably the most disappointing character for me because he's so nondescript from just the design to philosophy to action. I just wish there was more. And when you have so many heroes to get a very uneven level of development and focus, your villain at the very least should be matching up with like the top 2, top 3 characters in the series. And I never really got that from him.
I'd agree that he was my biggest negative when it comes to the characters as well. He's just very one note, but like you said, when the last episode is ending, we have some genuine stuff with him and Kara, some real connection and some real stakes that are there between the two of them and their overall connection to the other players that revolve around Nawam's motivation and his purpose. But I think purpose is a better word than motivation, because I genuinely was like watching the last episode and going, I'm still not really sure what his motivation is. Like, why is he doing what he's doing? I understand what inspired him. I understand his role models and what he personally wants to achieve as a human, as a Force user, as a Jedi, as a Sith, whatever he is. But I don't understand, like, what's his ultimate goal with the very common classic Star Wars cliche that everybody's tired of, that is part of his overall master plan. So that was the part where I was constantly like, I don't really get this from a macro perspective, but from a character perspective, I still kind of understood what he was searching for. And I guess my biggest guess towards the larger part of why he does what he does is still all aimed in the motivation of everything. Sorry. In everything that he experienced as a kid that ultimately shaped him who he is, and in trying to find that piece of himself that he wants to achieve, he's doing everything and just kind of pushing himself further and further and further and further in hopes to find that feeling that he wants to discover. And I think that all works on paper when you're breaking it down. But I do think, again, more episodes, you can have an entire episode about his life and what he did and how he became this guy and how he raised this army and where this all comes from. And that's, once again, where the promise of this series is there, but it doesn't really do anything with it, is the Ninth Jedi just promised so many ideas, so much world building possibilities, and I think the world building's really contained here when it comes to the villain side. I think for the hero side, it's actually done very, very well. And again, like Legends, like the Bantam era, like New Jedi Order, I really like this version of what a new Jedi group can be. There's, in a similar vein to what Luke does, a lot more acceptance and openness to people of different backgrounds with the Force, people of different connections to their own training and their own philosophies. And ultimately, it's kind of what's at your heart, right? What's within you? What makes you a Jedi, rather than do you follow the Jedi code of, at this point in the galaxy, thousands and thousands of years ago. And so I think that's where there's some really interesting, meaty, different storytelling. And in some ways, I felt like I was watching the anti-Star Wars Legacy, whereas with Star Wars Legacy, some of the plotting is really creative, and it really goes out there with the plot and some of the characters and those ideas. But ultimately, the structure of the world building is still very tied to what we had seen before. And I'm talking about the Star Wars Legacy comics from back in the day, because that's really our only other example of things that have pushed far beyond the main trilogies. And I feel like here, in a lot of ways, it's the world building and the structure of this universe that could be very, very different and unique. But then it's ultimately the characters and the plot points that are far too simple and too connected to mainstream Star Wars. And oftentimes, part of me was wondering if some of these cliches are more cliches for Western audiences because of how many Star Wars books we read, how many Star Wars shows we get. Like, all that stuff, I'm sure, is not nearly as popular in Japan. And so if this series is more so targeted at the Japanese audience, which I would imagine it is, considering how poorly they marketed it here in the United States, if this is targeted at more of a Japanese audience, then maybe they're not as used to some of these cliches that we're all used to, because we've read and watched and played and experienced so many Star Wars stories over the last 50 years. And so that was another part of my brain that was like, maybe these creators just don't really understand how generic some of this stuff is, because they don't have that same exposure to Star Wars that we have. But in general, I did really like the Jedi side. I liked the light side characters. I thought Kara was a solid character. She does make a massive jump halfway through this in terms of her scaling and power. She goes through an arc, and I think you were talking about this episode too, Sonic, the fifth episode. She goes through this big transformation arc into the fifth and sixth episodes that just felt like, again, if this was a 20 episode season or 2 seasons, we get a lot more there. And there's other things that happen to her in her life that I think justify what she goes through, but we don't see them nearly as much as we could have. And I think that's, again, very disappointing. Personally, when I heard they announced a Star Wars anime series, I was expecting 25 episodes or 24 episodes, the classic old school anime season. Now, I know it has become a lot more common for a lot of these big anime, both to get their seasons out faster, but also to just kind of capitalize on popularity and how much competition there is to do these 8 to 12 episode seasons. I don't know if that worked in the favor of the Ninth Jedi. So that was disappointing. I did really like her dad, too. Shima was a good character, and I think he has a lot of levels to him. And again, another character I would have loved to see a little bit more of at the end, but I think he carries the first half of the storytelling from a character perspective. He is the most interesting person in the first half of the show, and I think following his journey was not something I expected to really be a highlight of this season, considering how limited his effect is on the first episode back in Visions Volume 1. And so I thought that was certainly a pleasant surprise about this. Ethan, I also liked. I agree he has a minimal role in the first half, but I still thought some of the stuff they did with him was fairly interesting, and I thought he grew in a fairly nice, compelling arc from where he was in Volume 1 as well. So overall, I thought a pretty good cast of good guys, a little bit weak cast of bad guys, with a lot of promise there for a possible season 2 for Nawam. I think Nawam has immense potential as a villain. I just think they haven't really gotten to the core and the heart of who that character is. So I'm very excited to see if more comes based on the general viewership and discussion around this show from the Western side of the world. I don't know if we get a season 2, but maybe it blows up or is popular over time in the East, and that might mean we get more in the future. I would love that because I think a lot of stuff is here. I don't want Visions to just kind of go out the way it has. I think they've really mismanaged Visions overall. Season 1 was so explosive. I don't think they expected it to be as popular as it was. And it was so big and so highly touted. I think they made a mistake going with the world in season 2. I think if they doubled down on the anime aspect, I think they keep most of that audience from 2021. And then they carried into seasons 2 and 3 and then ultimately this show. But I think the steam has kind of run out on Visions. I was hoping this would be the refresh. And just with the way they've marketed it and overall with the lack of enthusiasm around this being a must-watch Star Wars show, like Visions Volume 1 kind of was when it initially came out, I don't know if it's really done much for the Visions title. And I think that is one of the most disappointing things overall. It's not really a fault of this show. It's more of a fault of how they've marketed it. But that's been quite disappointing. All right, final thoughts and a score out of 5. Seneca, how would you rate The Ninth Jedi?
Yeah, I mean, again, overall, like you said, it could be a series that felt more like 16 episodes, or it could be a series that felt like 5. It was just kind of stretched, kind of pulled, kind of squeezed all around. And it sucks because I think the excitement leading into this, even if like you had some problems with Child of Hope, it was like, okay, like yeah, the Ninth Jedi is one of the strongest story concepts. I think that's the problem though. I think when it comes to the Jedi stuff of everything, there is a lot that could have been done here. And I think it'd been really interesting if our villain actually was just a little bit more of a standard Sith or something. And it's kind of a weird thing too, because there is a Sith in this show who just feels more like an acolyte, feels more like a Grievous, and you're just like, okay, like how does that philosophy and then the Jedi philosophy that you're harping on so much, how do you find whatever lane that you're carving out there? Right? And that's the problem with the villain that Noam has a lot of these things that you could have really dug into and made something super rich out of him, even if it has to be a limited screen time, even if it has to have cliche dialogue and all that, and it just doesn't really happen. I also found that a lot of like the CGI droids and a lot of the designs for the villains and their like arsenal and everything, not as compelling as I hoped. I found that's where a lot of the generic, kind of simpler feeling of this series really starts to come through a lot. And it's always contrasted by what is there, or at least the potential of what's there, of the heroes, of the storylines, of who they're interacting with, stuff like that. And I was just like, ah, man, like really feels like there could have been something way more better balanced if maybe we had Nawam just interact more with everything in this story. He just kind of feels like a guy who walks around with a bunch of aura and he's like, "Yeah, I'm doing exactly everything, right? Because of you, Lajima, because everything you taught me." It's like, okay, like, well, what does that mean? And then we just don't get to really dig into that. It's almost like it gets uncovered in random chunks by other characters, especially in that final episode by Lakara. But yeah, it's too little, too late for me. Like I said, it feels like his story is really starting there. It feels like they took a Kylo Ren, Darth Vader inspiration, did a small remix of that, kept mostly Kylo Ren, and then still stripped away a lot of the stuff that's really compelling about Kylo as a character, about his fluidity, about how crazed and insane he can be at times and hurt and despondent and all in one, right? That was something that I felt like they really felt inspired by. I knew it would make sense with just how much more the sequels were a lot more globally watched and recognized, at least to start off with, than perhaps the prequels. And it's been a long time since the original trilogy in Japan and its reputation there, right? So a stronger villain, I think, would have really brought this all together. Another episode or two, I think, would have really balanced out stuff, even if it's not perfect for me. I think there should have been a little bit more to some of the creature designs, some of the hero designs and all that in the first half for me. I think that's where it felt a little generic to start off with, because I think that would have been a really good stepping stone for characters like a Homan, Taflar to all really get a little bit more of their due, even if they're kind of coming in and out of the story. But if you watch Ninth Jedi, if you watch Child of Hope, and if you watch that finale, I think you really do still get a quality like trilogy out of that. And whatever you remember or take away from stuff like that throughout the 8 episodes would still be great there. I know I didn't really mention this for the character parts. I do think Juro gets shortchanged here. He had so much potential and really did display a lot of it too. But then how his story kind of plays out feels very Obi-Wan Kenobi-esque and just too simplified in a way when he had such an awesome introduction, such a fun connection, and even for the first 3 episodes, feels like he's pulling on a lot of cool strings for everything in the storyline. So, that was for me a personal disappointment too. But I loved a lot of the fighting. I did like the characters and kind of the crew put together by the end. I did like some of the motivations for everybody that kind of popped in and how they kind of crossed over. I think everything looks a lot better in that first, the final 4 episodes for sure for me. That's really where the show shines as a whole. Even if it's not perfect, it feels like what I felt Night Jedi was promising to me. So I give it like a 7, maybe a strong 6.5, somewhere around there. It just feels like a couple of small tweaks, a couple more serious pushes from the concept that was there originally in the original short, I think would have turned this into something that is a must watch, even if you always know it's going to be non-canon.
I have similar thoughts. I mean, overall, I've been a little bit more positive on this series because I do think this is still fairly uncharted ground. Star Wars and anime, it's a different culture, different perspective. That to the point to where we still have to find what Star Wars anime really is. This is our first time seeing the same production company take on Star Wars 3 times, and 2 of the previous stories were 20 minutes long. So I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, but I thought this was a solid first step. Again, really liked the Jedi and the hero characters. I thought overall both the examination of the Jedi, the examination of who can be a Jedi and how they can impact the galaxy. It's very Legends-esque. It's very Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order-esque. It feels like something that would branch out from his new Jedi Order, and I think in a lot of ways I really did enjoy the fact that there's so much here to chew on for the future. But that's also my biggest negative, is like we've been hoping for more from this for years, and I don't think they fully delivered on the world building that they could have. I think the villain is one of the weakest parts of the series, although looking cool, having great fights, and having an interesting concept around him. I do think you could have explored him a lot more. Villains are so important to Star Wars storytelling and anime storytelling most of the time, especially when you have series in this vein, that I do think that was ultimately disappointing. It is, in a lot of ways, a very anime style character, a very nihilistic type villain, to where I did feel like it was a trope I've seen in anime before, but I've never seen in Star Wars. So that felt relatively fresh with his motivations. But I do think ultimately what he was trying to do also still fell into very typical cliche Star Wars material that I'm certainly very tired of moving forward. So I would love to see more from the Ninth Jedi. I would love to see a season 2 of this, because I still do think there's more here. I think if this show was a classic 24 to 27 episode anime season 1, I think it would have been really, really strong. I also think if this was 15 or 16 episodes, this would have been really, really strong. But 8 episodes, it felt like they tried to cram in too much into too small of a plot, and ultimately that kind of skimps on a lot of the detail here that I think would have added so much to the world they created. So I'm also been in between. My gut before we started the stream, before we got to talk about it, was a 3.5 out of 5, because I do think this is worthwhile. I think it's something that if you never watched anime, you could absolutely get something out of this, and I think it provides a very different take using stuff that you know and love if you're a Star Wars fan. But I haven't seen an incredible amount of anime, but I've watched quite a bit of anime, and I don't think this is like anywhere near like peak level of creativity that can be brought to something like this that I was hoping for with some of the initial concepts. So that's left me a little bit more cold as we've talked about it, but I'm still in the 3.5 out of 5 range. Maybe one day it could drop to like a 3.25 out of 5, but that's about as low as it goes. I still think this is a really solid series overall, better than a lot of the Star Wars stuff we've gotten relatively recently. So I think it's worth checking out, since this is our last Star Wars thing we're going to be getting for a while on Disney Plus until Ahsoka Season 2. And if you're craving watching something Star Wars, especially something different, you can find a lot to really enjoy here. It's an easy, short watch, and it's definitely worth checking out, even if it's not going to become one of the greatest Star Wars things of all time, or one of your favorite Star Wars things of the last few years. All right, that's our review of the Ninth Jedi. We'll take a few questions or comments about the Ninth Jedi from the chat, and then we'll go into some more of the chats that you guys had, and then we'll wrap it up. So first off, let's see, Ninth Jedi specific stuff. HD says, to be honest, I would have been more interested in Vision's content if it was canon, but knowing none of it's canon makes it hard for me because none of it will affect the lore in any way. Hey, and that's a fair take. I mean, that's, I think, a lot of people's biggest issue with Visions, and that's ultimately why I was hoping the Ninth Jedi would be that kind of catalyst for bringing anime fans into Star Wars, bringing people who aren't necessarily Star Wars specific fans, because if it can reach that audience and it's good enough to capture those people's imagination, people who aren't into Star Wars, then I think it would be good enough for Star Wars fans to be interested in giving it a shot too. But when you fall into that middle tier of content, like it kind of has, where it doesn't have massive defenders and it doesn't have massive haters, it makes it hard for the average fan of both mediums to really care. Is it great enough of an anime to check out when there's so much else to watch? Maybe not. Is it great enough of a Star Wars piece of entertainment to check out? maybe not. So that's where I don't blame you at all, HD. I think they've kind of dropped the ball with this. I think if they really wanted to explore and push into anime, I don't know if Disney funded this or they just licensed this out. But if they were funding it, I would have gone all in and said, "Hey, let's make a 20 episode season." Because might as well. It's our shot to enter into the anime world. If this misses, we might not enter in it at all. And so it just kind of feels like yet another one of these in between Kathleen Kennedy, Dave Filoni, Bob Iger, Josh D'Amaro, transition era Disney, Lucasfilm pieces of Star Wars content that's just kind of put out, and maybe some people will watch it and love it and everybody will talk about it. But if not, it's going to go away, and we don't want to spend much money marketing on it because we're trying to take Star Wars in a new direction that's beyond what we've done before. But I feel like this is a unique piece enough of Star Wars to where the opposite approach should have been taken, where you say, hey, let's drop a couple $1 million marketing this because this might reach fans that we don't normally attract, and we put money into this, we might as well go after it. But it just doesn't feel like they did that. And like you're saying, it hasn't convinced people who feel the same way as you, HD, to check out something that's not a part of the main Star Wars continuity.
Yeah, I mean, I feel similarly, HD Game Tube. Like, this was, especially with the lack of marketing for this, I was like, oh God, that's not a great sign. And we've seen things recently like Supergirl and all that to just when there's bare minimum effort, even something like Mandalorian Grogu doesn't necessarily get the ramp up that you're expecting. And even the moments it does get, kind of just peaks there and doesn't continue. It just kind of stays flat. I think we got one trailer like 2 weeks ago, and then we got like a final trailer that apparently was fairly spoilerish that I just didn't really watch. I was like, okay, fine. I understand that animation, especially under the Disney Plus banner, has been kind of sequestered to like, let's just ram in all the marketing in the last couple of weeks, that last month. It's very clear still that like Disney Plus, especially their marketing team, I believe was laid off a while back too. They've just have not had an idea of adapting to a modern audience, and maybe people feeling a little burnt out. But they also just what they are doing feels like they're just shortchanged by how much they can share and how much budget they're allocated for stuff like this. So that never helps, right? Even if this is non-canon, if it's in your face for a whole month, you're like, okay, yeah. And I felt like we at least got a decent amount from all, relative to the fact that we found out fairly early on, like, hey, this is just going to be 2 episode drops, no filler, all killer. And you're like, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, I don't love that from an animation, especially a Clone Wars animation history of how things used to feel so much more hyped up as a kid with TV ads and just old school marketing to now where we're at. But it felt like that was appropriate. It felt like there's enough word of mouth there that it's like, okay, now once season 2 comes out, they're gonna take another step up. As far as we know, this is it for the Night Jedi, and, am I super happy about it? I wouldn't say no. I think good, right? Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I agree. If things are not canon, things are gonna be a lot harder to sell, and I think that's partly why they probably had even less of a budget than most. Maybe they're investing way more in Japan and East Asia, Southeast Asia, or something like that, that we as Americans don't really get to see. But you look stuff at like my anime list and all that, it doesn't really seem like that's something that's happening. Most Star Wars fans don't know about this. And like Liam said, kind of being in that transition era, kind of being in the middle of the road, you don't have like even like the rage bait, clickbait, like angry at everything ever made under Kathleen Kennedy sort of people even make a comment about this or try to tie it to the sequels or whatever content they didn't like that has come out in the last 10 plus years. You don't even get that, then it's kind of like hard to see where exactly is the next step. I mean, there's been rumors that they're going to do like a dual series afterwards, and I think that might capture at least initial attraction to people because that still is one of the more iconic images, iconic visual styles throughout Visions. It was heavily focused in the Vision Season 1 marketing, which overall was just much stronger than what we've gotten for this Night Jedi solo series. But if there is a positive spin to it, I look at it as like this is a training ground. We can try out some small ideas and just try out animation, try out partnerships. And if this all kind of works well, maybe we can make it's like a Star Wars show that isn't super necessary to anything, but maybe becomes really fun world building for the sequels, or becomes a really fun New Republic era world building, or becomes a place for the High Republic to continue past the book initiatives of phase one to phase three, right? Like there's a lot of potential, I think, from what was actually shown and displayed in this series to make me go like, yeah, yeah, even if it doesn't become a huge hit, getting like 10 episode seasons every year or two and get 3 to 4 seasons of an anime that, might never really get a lot of love, but maybe somewhere between a Resistance and a Bad Batch in terms of importance and marketability, but is canon. Yeah, that'll be great, and, I've always been of the idea that I'd love to see maybe not necessarily the Jedi Academy of Luke Skywalker, but maybe you get to see, like, a lot of the stuff that's happening in the first 5 years pre-Mandalorian, and you get to have a lot of interesting characters in a very Clone Wars-esque style where there's a bunch of different arcs. You're not really committed to massive writing stakes, you're not committed to leaning on the story group and just the distance between working with somebody in Japan and someone here in the States, right? If you can contain a lot of their storytelling ideas to arcs, and I think, like I said, the arcs in this show had strong moments that I think if was further developed, if it was actually just kind of squeezed in a little bit more, would have kind of hit a lot of similar ways that like we got in the two individual shorts. I think there's a lot of potential there to go back to like a Clone Wars arc style storytelling without the massive budget, even if it has been worked on for decades now, like the Clone Wars style, and try it out in animation and get something that feels like, hey, original characters with anime tropes and all that, but still with the Stars banner that still is canon and can grow into its own little lane. I think there's a huge possibility there. And I'd love to see something like the Path of the Lightsaber manga, which I believe is rumored to get a volume two by the end of this year, even though we've heard absolutely nothing. If we can get stuff like characters in manga crossing over into anime series, like that would be perfect. Create your own little niche, create your own little lane there. You don't have to make the massive jump of like a book character from Aftermath, like a Cobb Vanth, and what that means jumping into live action. But if you have characters that have very similar mediums and can be a growing audience in Japan and around that part of the world with just enough here in the States and Europe and all that, I think there is a lot of possibility for a canon series. It's just that this series maybe needed a little bit more juice to convince people like us on the outside, but perhaps on the inside, it's gonna do what's necessary to take the next big step. Who knows? Maybe we hear something next year, as early as next year, at Star Wars Celebration for the 50th, and continuing the trend of like all the celebrations having some sort of global aspect to them.
Well, then, if there was anybody who was going to maybe push more Japanese stuff into Star Wars, it's Dave Filoni. He absolutely loves Japanese culture. I'm not sure how much of an anime head he is, but like he worked on Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is fairly anime inspired. He is a huge fan of Japanese monster movies and Godzilla and Rodan and Mothra and all those characters. So he's a huge fan of Japanese culture. You see it in Ahsoka. You see it in a lot of more of his recent work. I could see him being like, hey, this might not have been a huge ratings thing for us, but we really believe in it, and we're going to re-examine how we can tackle anime and Star Wars, and we really want to go for it again. So that might be our saving grace with getting more. HD, I'd like to ask you, did you watch season 1 of Visions? Because I feel like a lot of people watched that who then never carried on with the rest of the show. Did you watch each volume? Were you a season 1 person? Or did you just never have interest because it wasn't canon? I was interested in your thoughts there. And then, as echoing with one of Sonic's points earlier, and just in general with our conversation we've had about nobody watching the show, just from a Western perspective on like who's been reviewing this show, only 777 ratings on IMDb, only 393 ratings on Letterboxd, and then on my anime list, which is used by more than just the West, but usually, I mean, new series can get up to 100,000 to 500,000 ratings, and in a couple weeks of a new show coming out. Right now it has 7,325 ratings. So nobody seems to be watching this show. And that's really disappointing because it's not a bad show. Like, if this was horrible, I'd say, okay, great. Nobody's watching it. That means, it re-emphasizes to them not to make more stuff like this. But I'd love to see more stuff like this. I just think this season isn't perfect, but we can definitely improve on the structure that we've laid here. So I'd love to see more stuff like this, but I doubt the Ninth Jedi is going to be it because of how much it seems to be floundering. Maybe it'll have a resurrection period later on as people start to talk about it. But yeah, unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like it's catching on. But the Duel makes more sense if they did go with the Duel show, because I feel like the Duel has always been the face of Visions. Like, the Ninth Jedi was the thing a lot of people who really loved Visions were talking about. The Ninth Jedi was, to a lot of people, the best episode of that season. If not the best, maybe the most intriguing. But I think the Duel was like the thing they first marketed with Visions. It's the thing that got a Visions novel. It's the thing that's gotten Visions comic spin-offs. It's been the face of Visions since before season 1 even came out. And I think that's the series that I personally would have led with if you're going to just say, hey, we're trying to get Visions back on its feet, because I do think the Duel is the face of Visions. And if that fails, assuming it's good, or at least as good as the Ninth Jedi was, then I think you have to really think about how you're going to do Star Wars anime in the future. But yeah, so HD says, not watched Visions outside of the first 2 episodes, couldn't get into it, but also not really into anime in general, so I'm not really the target audience, although I love Lucasfilm animation. I was interested in Visions when season 3 came out, but when I heard that one episode basically stole a duel from a fan film, that turned me off. So it's multiple things, like me not being an anime fan and not canon, etc. Well, that episode that stole the duel was actually in season 2. So watch season 3, because I think season 3 was really solid if you're interested in watching one. But yeah, that's very fair. I mean, anime is still as big as it has become over here, and it's, 10 times bigger in 2026 than it was in even 2019 pre-COVID. It's still not, I would say, mainstream, or at least not overall anime being mainstream. It's still something that only certain series have kind of crossed that Western mainstream border. But I do think people are more open to it nowadays than they were back in 2012, 2015. To watching it, and to, like, more of the average Joe is willing to check out an anime, which I think is very cool. So yeah, that's a good perspective. Thanks for answering my question there, HD. All right, next question is, let's see. HD said, I really wonder how profitable this kind of show is for them. I don't know if they will keep doing more of it if it isn't successful, whatever the metric is. Yeah, we kind of just talked about that, but we'll have no idea. Obviously, only they will know internally. Usually the metric for them is how many subscribers did this get us, and how many subscribers do we think this helped us retain. One day drops are not great for retaining subscribers. It might help boost some subscribership. But I think at the end of the day, this is just one of those things that maybe was conceived to help boost international Disney Plus subscriptions. And again, we don't know how they marketed it in Japan. They might have a billboard in every major train station and on Shibuya Square, and they might have, advertising everywhere. We don't know because we're not there. But at least in the West, it's something that seems like they decided, hey, this is one of the last pieces of Star Wars content we have before our big 2027 reboot is coming. We just got to dump it and hope some people watch it. And next time we'll go for it even stronger. And it really does feel in a lot of ways like 2026 Star Wars, for as much content as there's actually been in 2026, which is like, there's a surprisingly good amount of Star Wars content this year for how underwhelming Star Wars has been in 2026. it just feels like Marvel 2024, 2025, where they were kind of like, we got to dump this stuff out and hope some people watch it. And if they watch it, great. If it's well received, great. But we're going to just kind of bite the bullet as we try to shift directions. And I think Star Wars is right in the midst of that. And next year is going to be their official starting year for that shift. Because this year has turned from, oh boy, there's a new Star Wars movie for the first time in 7 years. We can't wait. And we're getting a season 2 of a show that had a lot of promise. And we're getting our first anime. And we're getting a new animated show for the first time in years, to like, here's some Star Wars stuff. Check it out if you want. And if you don't, wait till next year. We've got Starfighter coming. That's been their shift. And it's unfortunate for some of the stuff that's come out this year, because not all of it has been, I would say the majority of it's been at least passable. But yeah, a lot of stuff has gotten caught in the crosshairs of their new business strategy. And if they don't market Ahsoka season 2 and Starfighter next year, then I'll have a serious concern about overall their direction. But I think this year they're just kind of biting the bullet on some of those stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this year is the year of the MCU. I think we've talked about this too. How last year, you don't really meet old expectations. You salvage Brave New World at the beginning of the year, and it has a really weak competition, so it gets a leg out to 400. Thunderbolts doesn't reach 400, but it takes a lot of BC level characters and makes them at least B tier all around, and is a very strong character driven story, like a lot of early Marvel, at least the better parts of the early Marvel was. Fantastic Four, I love personally, but it is very much like almost like a comfort sci-fi film. It kind of feels a little breezy when it could have had a little bit more classic Fantastic Four vibes, a little bit more of the powers and everything like that. But you could see that in a way, and even if Superman did beat it out, you could see it as like a, hey, this is a building block after building block after building block, and next year is going to be really the big thing. And hopefully, next year is a big, like a big shift, anyways, because just the way that people have been talking about Doomsday in the industry, how they're talking about Spider Man in the industry. If Marvel goes 2 for 2 here with Brand New Day, which is right now threatening and I believe still on track or just under tracking for beating the Force Awakens domestic record, which is insane to think about and something I personally don't wish, but as much as I love Brand New Day, but if that does well, and if Doomsday does well, and if they manage to add like an extra Spider-Man cameo before Secret Wars and all that, like they've done their plan to fruition. They've gone back to basics. They've looked at what worked, what didn't work, especially throughout phase 5. And phase 6 will be something that they'll be like, yeah, we made some mistakes. We went away from stuff that worked. We introduced too many things that didn't work. Again, I blame a lot of it on Chapek, on the mastermind of straight to DVD, now being in charge of straight to streaming, and then even messing with the parks to such a degree. But Iger righted the ship enough for a Demero to hopefully pick up on the right lessons and then continue building new ideas. And I hope that happens here with Star Wars. Everything we've heard about Starfighter so far has been pretty positive, right? We've gotten more glimpses of Starfighter than we did for Mandalorian Grogu, right? And even if Mandalorian Grogu is not a financial hit, I believe just a couple days ago it finally ended its domestic run near 350 for a film that a lot of people were expecting 300 or 400, like not great. The ratings not super tremendous, but hopefully a building block, right? Hopefully a building block for what they understand to do with their live action catalog, with a lot of their TV characters who might start getting that Marvel treatment of getting boosted up to film to be supporting characters, but then still have very specific storylines in live action TV shows that aren't necessary for everything. Hopefully that still continues, even though we haven't really heard anything past Ahsoka season 2 there. But yeah, like Liam said, if we get a lot of marketing and a lot of strong reviews and just attention to Ahsoka season 2, especially with it being filmed on the legendary Pinewood and pretty much everyone in production being like, it's a different level. There's way more money. There's everybody's at a different fitness level. Props department has reached a different stratosphere. If that's all true and the story is there, and Filoni makes that season 2 jump that he's done time and time again, if we get that, and Starfighter is a really strong post Rise of Skywalker film that begins opening up that era too, hopefully we're saying all the right stuff, right? Hopefully we get to see a Marvel-esque return. And again, we don't know if Marvel is going to get Doomsday over the line. Hopefully they are, but there just seems to be like a lot of internal buzz there. And I think even if there wasn't a lot of buzz to Star Wars this year, there wasn't anything wrong or anything poorly received about Mandalorian Grogu. It was just more like, was this necessarily? It's just fun, right? Like there's nothing much more to it, right? So I'm hoping for that. I think that's how we have to look at the future Star Wars, and if that also means anime, something like Ninth Jedi is seen as a building block to something that's actually way more involved, way more developed, has a lot more marketing, and then gets really that payoff and a expansion as they're hoping for. Great. Right now, though, we're in the thick of it. We can't really see what that all means, but I'm hoping because these are the two biggest franchises that Disney owns right now that they are hopefully taking their best of their talent and making the right adjustments that both franchises need.
Yeah, I think they've seen the best and the worst of both the MCU and Star Wars over the last 4 years, really. They've seen the peaks and the level of excitement people have for this franchise still, with things like the Revenge of the Sith and Phantom Menace re-releases. Like, I think those two made way more money than they ever expected it to make. And so that shows them that people are hyped for that type of stuff. In the same way, the MCU has had this resurrection here with Spider-Man, and they're very similar types of resurrections for both franchises and also falls. And I hope, I know you said, HD, that you hope that they learn from Mando that they can't just do any type of story and expect big numbers. And while I agree with that, I think they've already learned that. Like, I think they knew that before they released the movie. I think they knew that from a year ago, and they were like, let's not put money into marketing this thing because we know it's not the movie to launch Star Wars again, but let's hope to get as much as we can out of it, because they really, I mean, it's the worst marketed Star Wars movie ever, or at least since the Clone Wars movie. And it's the Rise of Skywalker was very poorly marketed too, but and that's another one, again, bad reviews. I feel like they knew what was coming with that, and they were trying to salvage it a bit, but that movie still made $1 billion because it was the last movie, a trilogy, mainline Star Wars movie. I think they've already learned that lesson, but one of the lessons I hope they don't take out of what's happened with Marvel and Star Wars is that we can't do new things. We have to keep going back to the well, because what Spider-Man breaking all these records could show Marvel, if they want to be not nuanced about this topic, if they want to just look at the surface of the topic, is, oh, Spider-Man is a character people know. Spider-Man has been in a bunch of movies that people have already seen. That's why it makes a lot of money. That could be the justification. Like Thor Love and Thunder, not good at all, still made quite a bit of money. Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, a character people have seen, still made a ton of money even though it was okay. There are a lot of properties that have had a little bit more storied movie history that I hope they don't just fall back on, we got to make all the same stuff over and over and over again because that's what makes money. I think if you look at Spider-Man, for example, it's a huge success because of how good it is. If this was bad, it might have had a big weekend, but it would have just died, dropped like a rock, right? They have to make quality and stuff people are excited for. And I hope they do that with Star Wars. I hope they don't go back to the well and go, well, the last time people watched Star Wars, we had the Empire and the Jedi and the Sith, and we had, First Order looks exactly like the Empire and all of that stuff. You can try new things, but it has to be good. And I think people today's world, the studios are finally, I think, starting to come around to the idea that quality really matters. I think it's something they've always put as a back priority. Yes, they would love to make great movies, but it's more important to make movies that people want to see than great movies in studios' minds. I think nowadays, with all of the other stuff that's here for people to voice their opinions, Letterboxd, IMDb, all of these rating apps, Rotten Tomatoes, first thing you see when you click on Fandango, all of these things are so important for how people are going to spend their money that they're finally starting to come around on. We need quality products. It's more important to take 5 years and make Spider-Man Brand New Day than it is to rush out a bad Spider-Man movie and kill the franchise, because they are truly killing these franchises by putting out bad stuff. And I think that's why, it's another reason why they don't market some of this stuff, is they go, this isn't good enough and we're already in a hole. Let's just hope people don't watch it. I mean, they would like to make as much money as they can, but let's hope that it doesn't have this big stamp on pop culture as this huge negative, rather than just coming for a couple weeks, being there in theaters. Some people are talking about it and then going away. And that's where Mandalorian and Grogu kind of did for him, is it wasn't a huge success, but it also didn't stick around long enough for it to become an albatross in the world of Star Wars conversation. It was there and then it was gone. And that's disappointing for fans like us who really hype all this stuff up. But business practice wise, it might have been the best thing for them, because even though it wasn't terrible, they're not on the hottest streak of Star Wars content over the last 10 years. And they need to really, really amplify their big wins, and they need to really suppress their misses. And I think that's ultimately the strategy they've gone with over the last few years.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I mean, I to that point, like you could look at things like Mandalorian, not maybe not Mandalorian, but you could look at something like a Rogue One. Rogue One, for all intents and purposes, the Garrett Edwards version did not work. Was treated as a mess. Tony Gilroy comes in and turns that third act into something that is arguably the best part of the film. Like, there are a lot of character motivations for Jin, especially that if you look at trailers and all that, she's changed dramatically, right? Cassian is good, but his intro is completely redone and all that, and it feels so much more devastating watching that film. But what's there is not 100% justifying anything until that third act is just knockout perfection. And I know I want to give credit to Garrett Edwards for that hallway sequence, but even if that didn't exist, that third act is just really, really good. It just is, right? And in a way, maybe if that film had not succeeded, right? If that had been like a bomb, and you would have heard an Iger be like, "Whoa, I got to take a step back," and like, maybe this whole Star Wars spin-off between all the mainline films, a year energy that he had and he wrote about in his biography, maybe that would have been pulled back right away. Maybe we reconsider Solo and we were like, maybe that's more of like a TV show where he gets to meet Lando and a couple other figures, and it's a little bit more oriented towards kind of becoming something that is a little bit closer to the young Han Solo trilogy books, where the depth of the character and what we can do there matters more, as opposed to just the greatest hits. Like, stuff like that has been kind of a problem throughout the Kathleen Kennedy era. It's not entirely on her. A lot of it, I do think, is because of Iger. Same thing kind of happened to some degree with streaming. You kind of rush out things. COVID obviously has an effect, but something like an Obi-Wan Kenobi, with the talent that was there, including Deborah Chow, including her cinematographer, who's one of the most storied Korean cinematographers, doing that in COVID, doing that without a big, big budget, doing that without capabilities of the volume really being understood, and just kind of rushing that out, right? Sure, it's fun, it's okay, right? But it could have been great. And you hear even like today promoting like End of Oak Street with Anne Hathaway, the two of them are like saying like, yeah, like, we should do like an Obi-Wan season two, right? But was the quality there in the first place? No, it's kind of pushed out right away. Mando became such a surprise hit that it became like forced into something that worked for season 2, but didn't work for season 3 when they kind of come back to it, right? There are all these things about Star Wars that I think has always been better with time and gaps and letting things sit and breathe. Animation is one of the few things that I was like, okay, you can do that yearly, because that stuff felt always like stuff that fills in important stories that just were not gonna be able to make it to the movie level budget, or, could not tell that whole story like a Clone Wars. And animation has still, since the beginning of '08, been a knockout for when it comes to 3D side. If you can go all the way back to, 04, oh 03 with the Genndy Tartakovsky micro series. Like animation has always been great. You don't need to mess with animation. Trust the animation, and they have shown a lot more trust in that so far, right? The only like miss has been Resistance, and I still think you have to give a lot of credit to Resistance for like the animation style and what that really was as an experiment, and it is still one of the sources of sequel world building. But this live action stuff, the movies, spin-off movies, and all the TV shows, it does take away from some of the mythic quality of Star Wars. It doesn't really feel like you can just treat Star Wars as a cinematic universe that is done linearly, because there's so many things that happen in different time periods that are explored, and giving things time to breathe, taking time off, maybe being just deliberate like Marvel has been, and being like, hey, it comes out when it comes out. That's probably what it's always should supposed to happen with Star Wars. And I think we might not necessarily get a huge ramp up. Like we might not just have like a Starfighter 2 rush into production. And I think that might be smart, because it's like, okay, let's let things breed. Let's see authors get a stab at some auxiliary material, and let's see if we can take some of the best practices of the old days, take the best practices of the Kathleen Kennedy days, and just let things kind of sit a little bit and fast track the stuff that is still doing well, like the animation, like the live action shows that are low budget, that don't need massive technology, that people are looking for as like a fun, breezy escape without needing to feel like it's got to change the whole galaxy, the whole way I think about Star Wars. You do that, I think Star Wars gets back on track the same way that the MCU has. And we don't have the same problem that the MCU had until pretty much Daredevil Born Again, where they had to retool that whole series too in its first two seasons. Because besides the whole WandaVision trilogy, everything else is pretty hit or miss, and definitely saturated how everybody looks at phase 4 to 6. But if they're on the up and swing, why can't Star Wars? I think Star Wars just, you have to be a lot more careful about how it's always been treated as a myth. If you want to make the sequel trilogy feel like a myth, you have to build out the era. You have to make it feel like there's so many stories to tell, but the best stories, the most influential ones, they gotta sit and breathe and really be deliberate in when they're released and in what quality that they're released in.
Yeah, I think I was reading a lot of these chats too, and the kind of the arguments going on between Dale and HD, and we can get into that conversation too about Starfighter, the overall importance of Starfighter. I mean, I think a lot of Starfighter, what you guys are both saying can be true, but what Starfighter really could be and maybe should be is, like Dale is saying, the opener, but in some ways it's got to be a Spider-Man Brand New Day-esque opener. It doesn't have to connect to all of these other things, but it has to be good enough to get people excited again for the overall franchise. And so that's where there's an importance here on delivering both high quality storytelling but also promise. And this kind of goes back to something I think you and I disagree with quite a bit, Dale. Is I remember you left a very long comment on my video that I clipped out about box office for Mandalorian and Grogu, and some of the comments I made. I remember I typed a whole like reply, I think, to you, but I think I've completely forgot to send it. So I'm sorry about not responding to that if I forgot, because I remember I was at this World Cup event when I was reading it, and then I typed this whole thing, and I don't think I ever sent it. But what I think fundamentally what you and I disagree with about the overall stakes of The Mandalorian and Grogu, and I think something that, to be fair to both me and Sonic, we've both acknowledged often about The Mandalorian and Grogu, is there are plot points in that film that can have huge galactic stakes, but what the filmmakers, and whether it's the people above Jon Favreau, whether it's Jon Favreau, whether it's Favreau and Filoni, what they consistently do throughout that movie is try to suppress almost every little bit of narrative thread that could lead to other excitement or speculation or enthusiasm towards future projects. They try to make it as secular as possible from pretty much anything else in Star Wars, to the point where it becomes something that feels very low stakes, feels completely unimportant, because they don't want you to have to have seen anything else, and they don't want you to have to think about anything else when it comes to Mandalorian and Grogu. Is that part of their marketing decision, or like with what we've just been talking about just, hey, let's make this movie low key, let's make it something that hopefully some people like, and if some people really like it, that's great. If it makes some money, great. But if it doesn't, oh well, it's going to come and go, and hopefully we're not hurt too bad in public image by this movie because we don't think it's great. Or they just decided we want an entry level thing for people who haven't seen The Mandalorian, and we think it's too risky to reference a Thrawn. We think it's too risky to reference a coming war in the galaxy. All those types of things that could be there that they've already set up, they just actively leave out. And I think that's something they chose to do that they didn't have to do with Mandalorian and Grogu. And I think the same thing can be said for Starfighter. Whether you agree or disagree with what the MCU has done to franchise filmmaking, what it has done is condition the audience to expect serialized storytelling. They're expecting movies to build off of each other. And if those stakes and that investment isn't there, then people feel like they don't think it's worth their time to see one-off movies. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's what the audience has kind of been conditioned to believe, both within the MCU style of filmmaking, but also the incredible rise and excitement around just TV and series in general, whether it's, movie level quality series like HBO's stuff with Game of Thrones or House Dragon, all that type of stuff, to smaller scale stuff. People love expansive serialized storytelling, and the MCU capitalized on that love and the growing enthusiasm towards that style of storytelling and turned it into a movie franchise. And I think that's where Star Wars has had to try to find that middle ground. When it connects to things that people are familiar with, it does well, like a Rogue One. But also Rogue One, I don't think does as well, even with those connections, if it didn't come right after The Force Awakens. If that came out when Solo came out and they were flipped, I think Solo does way better and Rogue One does worse, because I think it's all about the momentum and enthusiasm you're building there. When you have an episode number on a movie, that's a pre-commitment by the studio to the audience that, hey, you're getting 3 of these. There's a trilogy, and if you want to follow the whole story, you got to see each one. When you make standalone movies, if you don't connect them to anything, or you want them just to be these flat, one-off entry points, that's completely fine, but you still need, in today's world, tags and teases towards more. Whether it's a sequel to that standalone movie, even if it never happens, whether it's a connection to the broader Star Wars universe or some extra lore, whether it's a tease about future projects. And I just think that's the way the studios they've built themselves into this hole of like telling the audience to expect bigger picture story. And Star Wars is a big enough franchise with enough lore and enough popularity and enough continued storytelling across film and TV to where if they want to take that next step and be back into the elite level of popularity, they're going to have to start doing some of that stuff. And I'm not saying it's the correct way to do it or the incorrect way to do it, but it's the trend that audiences like. Now, if you go the MCU route of 2021 through 2024 of all these tags that don't go anywhere, people will get frustrated and they'll jump off. But if you're able to just deliver on even the smallest level of stuff, like when you look at some of these MCU post-credit scenes or teases, they're so simple in hindsight when eventually we get the movie. They barely have any connection to the movie that we eventually get. But they keep people enthused. They keep people interested. And I think that's what Star Wars has got to start doing is at least tricking people into thinking there's something bigger here than just the Star Wars you remember. And I think that's something that Mando and Grogu could have done even if they never delivered on it, even if it was in TV. But they decided actively, let's never mention Thrawn. Let's not mention Ahsoka. Let's not connect anything else that we've gotten all these fans for the last 6 years to be interested in. Let's just make this an experience that is here and exists, and you'll have to get the implied stuff. And I think most of us get the implied stuff, but the new people want to be able to jump on and be invested in something, and they just kind of see it and they go, well, that Mandalorian movie wasn't as bad as people thought, and then they forget about it. And I think there's a happy medium there to explore.
And even with the Mandalorian movie, like yes, we both agree, like the stakes just get nullified. And you bring up a pretty good point, HD Game Tube. Like you've sanctioned a bombing of the two Hutts left in power on Al Hutta. Sure, not Nar Shaddaa, but their ancestral home is still connected to it, and the stakes there in the underworld and in the immediate vicinity, and by a New Republic defense force, right? An outpost that's kind of sanctioned to kind of do their own thing using a third party contractor as justification for everything. So yeah, I think that ending of that film probably should have sat a little bit more in a period of gestation, even if you don't have to show a Thrawn. And I still think you could have just done a very heir to the Empire cover-esque situation where, or at least um, the newer covers that we've gone for the Central Legends, where you just see him from behind, right? Just show him with his arms crossed his back and like just like them mentioning like, okay, yeah, but like, what does this mean? Like we have to deal with this whole other problem, and have we just added more to that brewing problem? And then you just see one shot of Thrawn on his bridge from behind and just some random officer talking to him, like maybe Pelion or something. You make the people who've seen Ahsoka, who've been connected to the Mandoverse, feel like, oh man, I feel like all the 3 seasons and Ahsoka and everything attached to it, I feel like it's become earned to me. Like, even if it's not 100% there, there's a semblance of a plan there. Mandalorian Grogu just feels like a fun, supersized episode, a condensed version of maybe the first half of season 4 or something. And then the way that Filoni and Favreau have been talking about it, they're like, yeah, yeah, no, we might do a season 4 after this. Like, we've prioritized this instead of season 4. It's like, okay, you didn't do anything with this film where, like, it feels like even if this is an entry point for people that they feel like, "Oh, there's something next that's gonna happen," but you can still correct that. You can very quickly make a season 4, episode 1 of Mandalorian deal with the consequences. You can make that happen, and you can have that happen at the same time in Ahsoka season 2 with the New Republic Defense Fleet that's with Hera, with Akbar, kinda going around and dealing with all this stuff now, right? So maybe that's still there. Maybe you can look at this as like an animation factor where it's like, why the hell did they put a Grievous model from episode 3 updated in Siege of Mandalore's opening? Is it just to simply tie in with the time period that this is being set in? To some degree, yes, but then you realize, oh, they were gonna use that model for Tales of the Empire, where you get to see that fully unleashed, Grievous in another battle on Dathomir, just destroying all the Night Sisters and all that, right? Maybe that's what they're doing with Rada, right? Maybe we're just gonna see Rod the Hutt become a member that pops up here and there, not in every episode, but they spent the money in the very similar fashion to how they did with Zeb in season 3. Maybe that's how you have to look at it internally, but if you at least continue those plot threads, if you add weight to the ending, and the consequences to the end of what wasn't there in Mandalorian Grogu, this very quickly can be something both TV audiences and movie audiences can be, you know, tuned into. It'll probably just become strictly a like X-Files sort of situation. It's like, yeah, that's cool. That like reinvigorated merchandise and reinvigorated interest. And then when we got back to TV, we had a couple of great seasons following that because everybody felt like, okay, that was just enough to give us a little kick in the butt. And like, okay, yeah, there is that interest. There is a fun way of like, building up concepts and trying things out and making it all work out. And now we can really go back to that tried and true formula and clean up and improve on what was already working and what can continue to build out of this. I fully believe that can be a film that in 4 or 5 years, we look at it as like, yeah, it's not super important, but if you watch it in between, you feel like that's like a new starting point anyways for the combined story of Mando season 4 onwards and an Ahsoka, where you can just kind of crisscross between the stories and you get to see Thrawn's effect on a simple Mandalorian bounty hunter and the greater, larger story of heroes of like Jedis and all that stuff happening. So that can all work. I think it can also be very much done in the MCU realignment where Now, while I don't love like something like Brand New Day, not necessarily referencing stuff like in Thunderbolts that happening or stuff like Kingpin and all that, if you can just make some bullet point mentions, but then keep everything contained to the TV timeline and be like, yeah, if you're invested in this, stick with this. You don't really have to care about that stuff for Starfighter or any New Republic movies that might have recast original trilogy tree or something. Great. Keep it there. Figure out that lane. Seems like MCU's dedicated now to just making everything in TV, just street level, a different tier, kind of like how it was originally, right? Defenders were never expected to be Avengers. They had like a little small quip about like, oh, from Tony Stark being like, oh, like this is not Avengers level, but we have another crew cleaning up situations like this in New York. Spidey, like, don't deal with that. I think you could very much just make things clearly aligned again. There was maybe too much crisscrossing that definitely affected Marvel, but this film, as Mandalorian Grogu, is proof that maybe this dual timeline thing of like making every character jump into a movie audience isn't going to work out. But if we just double down on what worked and make this just feel like a fun return, a new entry point, we can make this Mandoverse again feel very much the TV universe that people can live in and enjoy and get stuff from other media tied into without feeling like it's shaping the big galactic stake events that something like a Starfighter has the potential of doing, right? So I think all that is there. Dale, I understand what you're saying about like, people are looking at leaks and like rumors and stuff about Starfighter. There is stuff out there, but it's not really as heavy. I feel like a lot of it's still rumor heavy more than it is proper leaks heavy. Starfighter's been fairly locked down. And I think, frankly, some of this just comes down to the fact that it doesn't have to do with J.J. Abrams. And for all he talked about trying to stop up leaks, he really did not do a good job for The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker. You barely heard much about The Last Jedi under Ryan Johnson. And we're kind of getting the same similar situation here with Sean Levy and Ryan Gosling for Starfighter. So I don't know. And like you said, red-haired Amy Adams. Amy Adams is not Amy Adams as people remember. She's kind of been MIA from like critically acclaimed films or commercially viable and big hits for 10 plus years. So she's just like another actor at this point. She's not like a drawing point for a lot of people. So for her to suddenly just be thrust into a Mara Jade situation, I personally don't believe it. I know Liam's made theories where it could be that, but you know, there's nothing of significance. And I'm someone who really dives into leaks. I don't know if I believe that, but that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe it either, but I'd like to I'd like to speculate about it because I do think it's fun, and I also think it's something that personally I feel would give more credence to the overall storytelling connection to the sequels. Like, and again, like that's where, as I know you like the sequels at least quite a bit, Dale, or at least the Last Jedi. I know you really like. Um, what I'm worried will happen to the sequels, as somebody who is even mixed on overall the sequels as a whole, but likes the Force Awakens and likes bits and pieces of the other two, is that they're just brushed away and forgotten forever because they don't want to have to deal with that. That's just the way filmmaking works. They're like, we don't want to have to deal with the negativity. Let's just pretend it never happened. That's what they tried to do with the prequels when they made the sequels. And then ultimately there was this resurgence of fandom for the prequels, and then they were like, crap, how do we include that into the last movie now that everybody likes the prequels? Let's bring back Palpatine. That's what could happen to the sequels if they go in the safe, like, agnostic route of we're not connecting to the broader Star Wars. We're telling a self-contained story that doesn't need to connect. Like, when you do that, it's in a way just trying to find some line to connect to pull yourself out of the controversy. Whereas personally, as a fan of Star Wars lore, even as somebody who's not a huge fan of a lot of the ideas that ultimately were culminated in the sequels, I'd rather see them try to explain it and try to add more to it and flesh it out than just ignore it forever. And then that doesn't serve anybody. That doesn't serve Star Wars fans who are obsessed with the lore, and that doesn't serve people who love the sequels. So that's where I stand. But I mean, ultimately, I don't think we'll ever fully agree on this topic, Dale. I mean, I don't actually, let me rephrase that. I don't think we'll ever see eye to eye on like the business side of this, because I'm seeing it from two different ways. I agree with you that there can be movies where you don't need to reference things. They can completely stand alone. That's fair. And not that I want to see that personally. If I'm watching my big budget, franchise films, I would love to see some connection, especially to the hours upon hours of time investment we've put into this, at least some acknowledgement of some of the other stuff we've seen that goes directly with the story, right? Like The Mandalorian Grogu is not a new property that just is now randomly connected to the Empire or something like that. It's a story that's been going on for 7 years. And so I think that's the type of acknowledgement that I think works both ways. If you give a little bit of connection and tease towards what has happened and what will happen, it works both ways to where it gets people who have invested that time going, oh yeah, they're referencing the things I watched in the show. That was, worth my time and important and might play a bigger role in the overall storytelling that's coming. And then they're teasing more that continues your interest in the overall narrative. So I think that's something that just modern franchise filmmaking has just gotten people accustomed to doing. And I think when you have a franchise where you have The Mandalorian Grogu, which is the fourth part of a series of Mandalorian stories, and if you want to count the Mandoverse as a whole, there's just so many other things a part of it that it feels very strange to just try to distance itself so far from the rest of it. But regardless of Mandalorian and Grogu, I do think that for Star Wars moving forward, their goal is to get people interested in the franchise again. And I think if they really want to be introspective, I know you said earlier that a movie can be a big movie without having Luke and Leia in it. Well, I can agree from a story level. They have yet to make a movie without a main Star Wars character until The Mandalorian and Grogu. And it didn't do very well at the box office. Even Solo didn't do well. Had Han Solo in it, didn't have Harrison Ford in it, but it had Han, Lando, and Chewie in it. They did Rogue One that had Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin in it. They've done 9 movies that have all had the main Star Wars characters in them, right? What is Star Wars without those main characters? That's what they have to find. And if they're going to succeed moving forward, they don't have to copy storytelling-wise what other franchises are doing, but they might have to copy some of the cliches in terms of structure of the overall arcs that they're trying to create within each film, within each trilogy, within each larger group of Star Wars stories, whether it's, the arcs that they're telling in a Old Republic style movie, whether it's arcs they're telling in a post Rise of Skywalker series of movies. They're going to have to create something that creates intrigue within those stories because they don't involve Han, Luke, Leia, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Darth Vader, Chewbacca, Han Solo. Like, they're going to have to do that. And Rey is not a big enough draw. Like, she's just not. She's not going to bring people into the theaters for those movies by herself. You're going to need some other things. You're going to need people interested in the overall narrative. And so that's where I think they're going to have to find a way to create a more serialized version of Star Wars to get people interested in what is popular in today's modern filmmaking, franchise filmmaking styles. And it doesn't mean, I'm not saying go multiverse. I'm not saying go with all these Marvel things. Like, it's not copy the MCU, but what has made the MCU successful is the constant intrigue that builds movie to movie to movie. That's why Ant-Man and the Wasp making $800 million. That's why Captain Marvel made $1 billion. It's the constant intrigue. And so whether the entries are good or bad, people are interested in seeing them. And I think Star Wars has to find that path because that's the only way to try out new ideas in a world where you don't have Luke, Han, Leia, Anakin, all those characters. And then within that, you build new characters that hopefully become characters who you can bank films on. And maybe that is Rey one day. Maybe that is Poe one day. Maybe that is Finn one day. I don't think they are right now with the controversy around them, but I think they could become that. I think Ryan Gosling could become that. You don't know who will be the next person. Nobody would have thought Din Djarin would have been that next person. But I do think they have to find that. Star Wars is in this just blank space right now. And so that's ultimately the key. And for a franchise that's had 50 years worth of stories built around the same, 10, 12 characters, they're going to really have to do some soul searching and find how they can use the lore and the world of Star Wars to bring people to the theater rather than the characters and faces you recognize.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we bring up the example why Brand New Day has just been doing so well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I think it's just that one, this film connects so much with the current majority of the audiences, right? Like if people are paying big sums for premium experiences, they got to see a lot of the stuff that we did love about Spider-Man in the Andrew Garfield films, in the Tobey Maguire films, that maybe wasn't there in the trilogy, the home trilogy of Spider-Man. You look at Toby fans, they get to see a lot more of the practical suit and all that. You see Andrew Garfield fans, you get to see a lot more complexity and world building, but actually play it out rightly about and very similar to the comics. You see fans who love that deconstruction of the origin of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and then you get to see what's new, what's been built up and payout. Like, in a lot of ways, Brand New Day is a correction to the character. We got a practical suit again. We got much better swinging. We got him in a lived New York. He's in a street level film. A street level film passing No Way Home, even without a China release, is crazy to think about, right? But it's because they took everything they learned and they've appealed to so many audiences. And especially knowing that the main audience now for Spider-Man is primarily Gen Z, they kinda connected to, like, a lot of stuff that films this year have been connecting to. You can look at something like Obsession and what it says about relationships and about modern dating and power dynamics and all that. It's a really, really compelling horror film based around those ideas. You look at the concept of Peter Parker, where life feels a little meaningless just to continue doing the same routine and routine again and again, and you kind of throw yourself into something. You don't really have time and space for relationships, for emotional connection and all that, and you feel worn out and all. That's always been part of the Spider-Man character. That's something that's multi-generational, but to put it in a very Gen Z way with a Gen Z soundtrack, much more so than the home trilogy and all that, it's just landing for a lot of people that way. I think they've like to all the points that Liam's saying, you have to find something that people latch onto. And even if you don't love all the interconnectivity with the Hulk, with the X-Men setup and all this and that, maybe it feels a little busy for some people, maybe it feels just the right amount, or maybe not enough. I've heard pretty much all three of those perspectives. The fact of the matter is it's got people talking and it's feeling emotionally rich and resonant to all three generations of the live action Spider-Man film going audience. And it's really captured it all in a wonderful way. And obviously, the marketing for the film is an old timer. I think it's 309 million or something. It really helps that Zendaya and Tom being married and Jacob being there still, that original trio. Like there's that continuity, that stuff that really matters to you. So in that sense, Dale, I do agree. Like for a starfighter, I do believe we will see Ray. Do we necessarily get a new Jedi Order next? No, we've heard too many mixed things there. The hunt for Ben Solo being like suddenly greenlit and canceled before we even heard about it, right? How does that change things? Is that being combined together? Are we getting a sort of quasi Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley sort of trilogy? I think that's a possibility, like at least a film or two with them together, because they work. Both of them are at their best together. Daisy Ridley has made some pretty smart choices in the indie circuit, but she hasn't necessarily maintained any of that popularity. Whereas versus Adam Driver has exploded, and people are rumoring him for X-Men and all that. So why not continue that synergy? And if you want to please that guy, be like, hey, buddy, we don't necessarily love everything about that film. We don't necessarily want him back for some reason, God forbid why. But if we want to combine that with Ray and continue building out that dyad and really helping that character get another chance, and then filtering you guys into a bigger semi reboot post sequel, like yeah, I think that all makes sense. And like you said for Laura Liam, I want to see that continuity. I want to see the sequel era, post sequel era, whatever you want to call it. I want to see that timeline built out, right? That just hasn't happened. But I think, like Dale said, you can't ignore that. I think we are going to see Ray. Are we going to see much more of Ray immediately after? I don't know. Like you said, Dale, Daisy's been a little too excited for something, in a way that has been very mixed from what we've heard from leakers and all that about the state of the script, the state of even Charmine kind of almost dismissing it the last time that she was in a public event. Nobody really knows what's going on there, but again, the overall semblance of a plan or overall idea of like continuing lore and not just abandoning it, I think that's always been something that's been part of Star Wars' core DNA. It just has not really happened with the sequels, and time is kind of running out. Hopefully, Starfighter opens that door. Hopefully, we get a cool cameo from her. And if you don't love Ray, you can pretty much ignore it. But if you like Ryan Gosling's character, Flynn Gray's character and all that, right? Like, and we get to see maybe some interesting connections made to lore, maybe stuff to the Mandalorian that maybe we even get to see like a grown up Grogu or something with Ray and like a little practice tool or something like, stuff like that. That could really open the floodgates again. That could really make people feel like there is a direction to everything while still kind of building off of the ideas of I said, cleaning up, making things stay in their own lanes. It's been a historic thing with TV. Always seems like every couple a generation and a half, TV seems to make this stupendous leap, and it's like, oh yeah, now it's why do we even need movies? And yet now what are we seeing? We're seeing an incredible box office here. We're seeing Gen Z moving away from seeing stuff on our phones and stuff like that. And even if they are getting TV, they're sick of stuff taking 2, 3 years. They're like, I want to see more shows that have either more episodes for lower budget or just lower production value overall and more focus on characters and storylines and things that I can remember and only have to refresh every couple of months as opposed to refreshing every couple of years and continue. Like you don't see shows like The Bear not get all these awards and stuff like that and not get all this criticism, even when it has down moments, unless there's stuff that's happening every year. That hasn't happened with Star Wars. But if you make maybe like the movies have that traditional gaps where you still connect to the lore, you still bring in characters as needed, but you still have a yearly release for TV shows again, even if it's not the biggest budget stuff, that you win best of both worlds. And I think that is what's happening with Marvel. Is that form of serialized storytelling that can't be 100% replicated by Star Wars, but for the mythic quality to land as it had before, you just got to clean up a couple things. I don't think we're that far away. I just think that it's been a really depressingly dead year with how much time has happened in the last 2 years of Star Wars that feels insignificant. Like, pretty much after High Republic, even for me, it's been kinda hard, like, trying to stay connected to Star Wars after how big of a success that was, even with its flaws.
Yeah, and those are all fair points, and that's their ultimate hardest task with Star Wars is like all the things we've just said. Getting the interest is important, but the thing Star Wars doesn't have that Marvel has is Marvel can always fall back on pre-existing material that they can use as a basis for whatever stories they're trying to tell. Whether it's the near limitless catalog of heroes and villains to just naming a movie after a comic book that people really love and maybe people getting excited about it, like Secret Wars, like Civil War, like Age of Ultron. But Star Wars is original. Star Wars is an original IP. And because it's an original IP, those original parts of it are more synonymous with Star Wars than really any one particular character, one particular story is with Marvel. So that's always the issue that they're going to have is what is Star Wars if you don't have the rest of these characters? Is it the world? Is it the Jedi? Is it the Sith? Is it the Wars? What is it? And that's the problem they're going to have. And that's why I don't know if it's as simple as Starfighter comes out and is great and Star Wars is back, because we're entering that Bantam era of Star Wars history where like we're getting to a point where there's completely uncharted ground. And what do you do with it? That's why it's interesting to look towards Legends or look towards canon or other material, because Star Wars does have source material in books and comics, but they've yet pretty much refused to ever go with any of it. That's why I always, I know that video I made a long time ago about like, is a Legends cinematic universe something that's worth pursuing? The majority of that idea was just purely that people know Luke, Leia, Han. Now there's an argument that from Solo, the poor reception and poor box office of Solo, are Luke, Leia, and Han attractions like Spider-Man is, or are Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill attractions? Like, that's the question they still have to answer as well if they ever wanted to recast. So, like, there are so many questions around Star Wars and the future of Star Wars that there's no one right or wrong answer. I just personally believe the only real right answer is that they need a backbone of serialized storytelling to create interest. And they can do one-offs in between. They can do other spin-offs and other things around it. But Star Wars has always been at its best in trilogies, in sagas. And I think the thing that people love about Star Wars is the kind of epic side of that lore when it can get into the serialized form of storytelling. I mean, before Star Wars, there were trilogies, but it wasn't common for every major franchise to have a trilogy. And so Star Wars was one of the people that implemented the idea of serialized movie storytelling. I think you've got to make that the backbone of what Star Wars is. And it can be different eras, it can be different things, different characters, different groups. But that's where they have to go, and that's the only real direction I think they can go, because other than that, it's a completely blank slate. The only other things you could do is go back and use Legends characters and do Old Republic style storytelling and tell a new story, but with those Legends characters, because that's really the only other base you have for things people are familiar with for moving forward. So it's going to be all original. So it's an interesting topic, and we went a long time for that, and I want to thank Dale and HD for their contributions to the conversation. And, of course, anybody else who commented. I know Brandon commented a few times. I think we got to send out the final part of this stream with Brandon, because I feel bad we haven't gotten to some of Brandon's stuff. And we'll finish it off here. And Brandon, again, save your other questions. I know this has happened to you a few times. This was supposed to be mostly a Ninth Jedi stream, and then we kind of got sidetracked. So we'll talk about more stuff post D23 next stream, but I think this is a good segue into whenever our next stream is Brandon's first question of the night, which was, what do you hope to hear about at D23 for Star Wars panels from The Mandalorian, Grogu, Ahsoka Season 2, Maul Shadow Lord, ? Well, I think for me personally, when it comes to Mandalorian and Grogu, I don't expect to really hear anything other than maybe a Disney Plus date, and they might have already announced that. But I kind of don't expect anything from Mandalorian and Grogu. Maybe they'll have some props and stuff out for people to take pictures with. But I'm not expecting anything from Mandalorian and Grogu. Ahsoka Season 2, with it presumably being the next thing that's coming, and the only reason people assume that is because it was supposed to come out this year, and it got delayed till next year. So with that presumably being in the first half of next year, I would expect Ahsoka Season 2 to be one of the focuses of Star Wars, just because Disney D23, they also like to talk about Disney Plus, or at least they have in the past with D23s. I know Disney Plus right now is kind of in a revamp phase, but Marvel doesn't really have much when it comes to Disney Plus that they're really plugging. I know Vision Quest is this year. Outside of that, it seems like they're in complete rebuild on their Disney Plus stuff as well. So I think Ahsoka Season 2 is kind of your most high-profile thing you have moving forward on Disney Plus. So I expect them to spend some time on Ahsoka Season 2. It also, people get excited to see Dave Filoni. I'm assuming they'll trot out Dave Filoni. He's going to be there because if they follow the trend of past D23s, with him now being the head of Lucasfilm, he'll be the one there hosting the entire panel, because Kathleen Kennedy always did it in the past. So he'll be doing the whole Star Wars section if they follow the same trend as pretty much every D23 since Star Wars was a Disney brand. And then Maul Shadow Lord, I would love to hear at least a target season or quarter for Season 2. I would love for them to surprise us and be like, yeah, it's coming out in April next year, just like Season 1 did. That would be awesome, because we don't have any other big Star Wars conventions before Star Wars Celebration next year, which would be right around the time when Maul Shadow Lord would have started this year. So they're not going to announce it at Celebration if it's starting in April. So I'm assuming if they don't announce that now, it doesn't mean we won't get that announcement randomly later on, but we have a little less of a chance of it coming out before Celebration next year if they don't announce that at D23. But I would love them to say, hey, we're working on Moss Shadow Lord and we're hoping to have it out by fall 2027. I think that would be pretty cool. Other than that, I don't really expect much from D23 for Star Wars. I think it's going to be very Marvel focused. I wouldn't be shocked if they put out another Doomsday trailer or the Doomsday trailer they put out at Comic-Con. That is a very much so a trend for Star Wars and Marvel at Comic-Con and D23 is to show something exclusively at Comic-Con and then drop it at D23 to the public, or vice versa. Sometimes D23 has been before Comic-Con in some past years, and they've shown stuff at D23 and then waited 3 weeks and then dropped it at Comic-Con publicly. So I wouldn't be shocked if they drop Doomsday stuff. There's been the rumors about the X-Men. That would be cool if they dropped more X-Men news. But yeah, I think D23 is going to be predominantly a Marvel-focused event. And maybe, Disney animation, Disney proper. Maybe we'll get, I know they're shooting Tangled, I think, right now, live action, maybe something like that. There's been some rumors about other, like, Pirates movies and those types of things. I think you'll hear about that type of stuff. But I do expect Star Wars to be very quiet. It wouldn't shock me, though, if they had, like, Sean Levy and Ryan Gosling there just to say, hey, we got this movie Starfighter coming out. It's coming out next year. Here's a couple pictures or something from it. Like, that wouldn't shock me. Maybe a first official poster or something, and it's something really basic, like Ryan Gosling's face and Starfighter over it. Like, I wouldn't be shocked about any, like, teaser stuff like that. But I don't think we get any real concrete information. Definitely no trailers. Maybe at best an Ahsoka tease, but Disney Plus trailers recently have been dropped at the earliest, like 6 weeks before the new season of a show. So I'm not really expecting anything from Ahsoka that's dropped to the public, maybe exclusively there. But yeah, that's kind of where I see Disney going with the Star Wars properties, because I think they've built up Star Wars 50th anniversary next year at Celebration so much already, and I feel like they haven't even really started kicking in their marketing into gear. So I'm imagining once Doomsday comes out, once the year kind of turns, and I would imagine we get a Starfighter trailer around Doomsday, because that'll be 6 months out. I would imagine they start really kicking the Star Wars hype into high gear because of the movie in May, and because of Celebration. And then we'll get most of the slate and like what they're actually planning for Star Wars at Celebration next year.
Yeah, I mean, I know Brandon, you also mentioned Pixar. We could probably see like Incredibles 3 news or something coming there. A little bit more gato and stuff like that. Obviously, a little bit more time relevant, right? What how close they are to release in comparison. I am slightly optimistic about Star Wars at D23. I think in a way, like we're in this weird kind of bubble too right now because we still haven't seen like the continuation of the Star Wars video game resurgence. Like, Outlaws might not be everybody's favorite, movie, not movie, favorite game, but we've seen just pretty much since Fallen Order, like a return to a lot more of the classic formula of like more story driven, more gameplay driven stuff. Obviously, Battlefront 2 had a lot of love during COVID, and it being shut down pretty much at its peak is still super frustrating to me because we have files of Asajj Ventress and Ahsoka kind of just out there that we never really got around to playing with, and possible maps and Mando collaborations, and a lot of Disney Plus could have really benefited from having just their stuff connected. Now it seems like they're just making skins from TV shows and releases for Fortnite, and that's working for a lot of people. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's where Josh D'Amaro really steps in and like talks about like a big thing for Starfighter being set up, like a big hub, almost like a new like a walk like a digital walkthrough of like the world and space of Starfighter. for certain audiences. You know, it's never going to become the main, I think, for me, but for especially Gen A, that is a big way where they get into worlds first. They literally have to walk into a digital facsimile of it, right? So I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that. I think that would be really good. Come a long way from the Palpatine announcement to the galaxy. I think just making it more of like these are some different hubs and stuff like that that will be in Starfighter. We'll release more as we get close to it, but just seeing how people reacted like stuff like Sonic skin and all that recently, I'm just like clearly there it is a huge way for brands to connect to and work with, and he's really emphasized digital spaces and new frontiers for franchises to really explore. So I wouldn't be surprised if Starfighter gets a lot of investment in that sense for me. So I could see some little announcement there about their plans for Star Wars. I know there's been a lot of Star Wars stuff happening recently. As far as going to more proper gaming, though, I think you have to start teasing certain dates. I think you have to start teasing Jedi 3. It seems like if you just say like, "Oh, like we're gonna start telling the date at Celebration," that's kind of too late, right? I think the idea is that they want to have Star Wars. If this has been the big year for Marvel, and then they have pretty much nothing besides Daredevil, Born Again, a rumored Heroes for Hire special presentation, and then um, what is it called? Secret Wars at the very end of the year, which I don't know if that's even gonna make it with how big a project that's really gonna be. This should be a great opening for Star Wars, and you have to start teasing shit. So I think it's gonna be maybe like a Jedi 3 date announcement or like target window, like June 2027 or something like that. I'd love to see a little date of that. And we're in this weird bubble too that we don't really know what the reputation and the love will be like or hate will be like for something like Zero Company, which we just got a bunch of new previews for today. We don't know what Galactic Racer is going to be like, but pretty much every like industry preview of these two games has been like really well received and you know continuing not only just like building off the final hurrah of EA post sale with Jedi 3, but the continuation of more developers past the exclusivity, starting off okay-ish with Outlaws in a lot of ways, but now possibly having two pretty well received and big games that really harken more to like the peak days of LucasArts. I wouldn't be surprised they use D23 to like really emphasize more of the gaming side of stuff. I really think that's a possibility. I think that's a safe bet to make in comparison to saying like we're gonna have a date for this movie or this TV show, right? Like we have no clue about that. There's just so much contradictory information out there versus games when they kind of announce it. The only thing that we really don't get is like maybe target dates being met, but at least we know it's coming, right? So I'd love to see that be a big focus. um, Probably like you said, for TV shows, we'll probably get a little bit of stuff about, oh, Mandalorian Grogu is gonna be streaming finally in like September or something. I think it just got announced for like a digital date, so they really took a long time to just squeeze out whatever they could out of that. But I think they would be pretty fun if they like tease like the Mandalorian's not done. Like maybe we just have like a almost like a Spider-Man will return sort of thing. Maybe we'll get something like that just flashed on the screen. The Mandalorian and Grogu will return, and we get to not have a commitment to a season 4, but we get to see like possibility of like stuff happening there. And I mean, for me, I think the simplest way of that stuff happening would be to just have Din and Grogu have an episode in with the New Republic Defense Fleet or something on Dathomir or something in Ahsoka season 2. I think that would be a way to really ramp up severe hype for Ahsoka season 2 that's been lacking. If you know that at least some fallout and continuation of Mandalorian Grogu will be there in a relatively short period of time, right? That's been the thing we both have been really hoping that can be rectified as soon as possible about the film. But I wouldn't be surprised if we get a sizzle reel for Ahsoka season 2. I think when you shoot something as on the legendary Pinewood Studios lot, you want to showcase like this is not just another season of the Mandiverse. This is a huge step forward. This is something that is massive. This will be possibly the last live action Star Wars for a while, but we want people to feel like we're gonna go out with a bang. I really think they're gonna really emphasize that. I think at bare minimum pictures, but I think there will be at least an exclusive sizzle reel for what's happening with Ahsoka season 2. if they have a trailer that they show there and they release online, that would be incredible for the fandom because we definitely need some juice and hopefully some continuation into the video games that are going to be coming out just weeks later and stuff like that. But I really hope the best for Ahsoka. I think Ahsoka needs proper ramp up. This will be the longest gap I think of any of their series, both MCU and Star Wars, between a first season and a second season. Like it's insane to think about, but that's the truth. That's the delay. This is, I think, the official record now. So you're gonna have to put some work. You're really gonna have to put a lot of legwork, and even if you don't show a full sizzle reel, maybe we get to see like a tragic passing of Ray Stevenson and his friend taking over the helm, and we get to see Balin just walking around some crazy crypts or something and crazy force powers or whatnot. Like just something to just be like, whoa, okay, this is like a drip feed. And if we start getting drip fed in a way like we got with those little tiny micro teasers that we got for Doomsday last year, I'd love something like that for Ahsoka. I think Mandalorian Grogu, they tried some things, and hopefully they've collected whatever results they need to make a proper marketing campaign. So I think we're gonna get something for Ahsoka season 2. I'm hoping sizzle reel. I'm thinking probably pictures and like maybe a quick 5-second scene or something. But I think that there's a lot of possibility there. I think we'll get a date for Maul. I think that's gonna be pretty out there for sure. Cause I just don't see them, especially with how it committed it is to just being story, 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 and no filler. I feel like they're in the timelines of animation being so many years ahead. I think they're gonna have something ready. It'll be maybe later in 2027, but I think it will be there. But I think a big announcement that they could make is that they're gonna switch to maybe a weekly or batch release format instead of just, the 2 a week, quick 5-week turnaround that didn't really let that leg out. And I think some images of him with Crimson Dawn and maybe some images of like the upgraded armor and look for everybody. I think that's going to be pretty big there. I don't think they're going to announce per se another animation series, but I think there's going to be some sort of animation surprise. I think Maul is good enough to carry if they switches over to weekly format, but I think they're gonna tease a little bit more about animation. I just don't see them like just sticking Asajj into a mini Tales arc and just being done with her. I think there is potential for a path series that can like cross over and intersect with Maul while still keeping separate storylines, at least timeline wise. I'd love to see something like that be teased. I think animation has always been their strongest strength for the last couple years. So might as well keep developing that. So definitely games, maybe animation right underneath, live action TV shows. And then for Starfighter, I would love a couple more photos or a little bit more images of just like stuff that we used to get for The Force Awakens and stuff about like, oh, here's some cool little alien guy that Gosling is interacting with. And this is on set. It's not actually from the movie, but it shows you what Sean Levy and Gosling are trying to do, building up the Starfighter world, right? And besides the digital space of Fortnite or something. So I think I'm fairly optimistic about Star Wars. I think just the last couple of days of fluctuation with MCU with the X-Men casting, I can very much see them be like, okay, we need our other franchise to at least bolster some parts of our whole agenda because people are fighting over contracts or we're leaking things to all the people who generally are the leakers and people who collect spoilers for the MCU to kind of throw them off the game. And then we actually are going to have a much more balanced slate. It's been a while since I feel like D23 has felt valuable. The return to Comic Con for Marvel was a pretty big success the last 2 years. I would imagine they do the same thing here with D23 because at the end of the day, wouldn't you want your own convention to be well received again, be an important place again? This feels like a good half step for celebration, really, is where everything explodes. You're in the full swing of things.
I love your optimism. Um,
I gotta be optimistic.
yeah, I mean, I would love to agree with a lot of the things you said, but yeah, I don't see them Star Wars really doing much. Just 'cause I think the way they treat the 50th next year, right? We know we're getting the theatrical re-releases, I think it starts as a true like celebration of the old before moving into what's new. And I really do feel like it's going to be one of those like classic Disney birthdays that they do for the parks, where like the birthday for the park doesn't actually start on the birthday. It basically is the year after. And then they use the year of the anniversary to like hype it up. Because I feel like Star Wars, you're right that they have a massive ramp period where like Disney doesn't have any high profile releases off the top of my head from Marvel or Star Wars from May through December. And so that's why there's always been the rumored, secret movie between Doomsday and Secret Wars, and will they split Secret Wars into two movies and maybe move it up or leave it where it is and then move the second part to 2028. But yeah, I just don't see them really doing much. I think Ahsoka is the best we get. And I was trying to look back while you were talking too about when we got like our first marketing for Mandalorian season 1, because you're right, like we have not really had a Star Wars show. We haven't had a Star Wars show in live action in over a year. Am I remembering that right? Right? It was Andor, right? It was our last live action Star Wars show, and that ended at the beginning of May 2025. And so we're going on a year and a half. By the time this show comes out, it could be 2 full years without a live action Star Wars show, after having basically like 3 a year for 4 years straight. So I was going back to Mandalorian to see how they marketed that, and I think they dropped their first trailer at D23 because, and I was there, so I think I kind of remember that, where like, because they had a whole Disney Plus panel in 2019 because it was the launch year Disney Plus. They were hyping it up so much. I think that's when they dropped their first trailer. And if that was in August of 2019, then the show came out in November, I think. So it was about 3 months ahead of time, 3.5 months ahead of time. And I think, so that means like they could drop a trailer, but it would probably be about as early as they've ever dropped a trailer for any of their streaming shows. So I think it would be a surprise, but I wouldn't be shocked with an Ahsoka trailer, at least a teaser. Especially because the one they dropped last year at Celebration got out so widely that so many people saw the concept art trailer that they've like had stuff out there. Like there's been stuff out there about Ahsoka. So I wouldn't be shocked. I do agree with you. I think we're getting pictures for sure. I think we'll get a few official stills, maybe even like a still of Hayden or somebody like that, because he's pretty much confirmed to be in the show. We know he's already in season 1. Like stills that will get people hyped without obviously revealing much. Filoni is kind of in that typical like J.J. Abrams vein as well, where it's like don't want to show anything. Filoni often doesn't show much from his shows, but I wouldn't be shocked if they did something like that. I just think, with Maul, their pattern over the last 4 or 5 years with animation is just they don't really hype it up at these conventions. They just randomly drop. And I wouldn't be shocked if like we get a random February drop of a trailer and a poster and they're like, it's coming out in April. That wouldn't shock me at all. So I would love to say that they're going to talk more about Maul, because the thing I do agree with you when you were talking about all these possible things that could happen is D23 is a celebration of Disney. And I've been to D23 3 times, and every time they start out each panel by talking about how great all the things they've made recently were, even if they weren't so great. So they're going to have somebody come out. Filoni's going to be out there, and he's going to be like, how about The Mandalorian and Grogu, huh? And then everybody's going to cheer. And then he's going to say, hey, how about Maul Shadow Lord? So there is a possibility they like talk about, I think they will 100% talk about Maul Shadow Lord. Just, do they announce anything? I don't know. I could see them saying, oh, we loved Maul Shadow Lord. We're so excited for season 2. It's coming next year. And then that's it. So I'm not super confident with Star Wars information. I hope you're right. I love the optimism. The video game side will be interesting, though, because when I went to D23 in 2015, which was my first D23, so I'm not sure what they did before, but they had a video game panel. But that's when Disney still had Disney Interactive, and then they closed it that same year after they dropped Disney Infinity 3.0 with Star Wars. And at that panel, Daisy Ridley and John Boyega were there, and they gave away the first ever Finn and Rey Disney Infinity figures, and they signed them for a kid, and it was a great little moment. But they had a whole video game panel. Do they bring that back? And I would normally say, well, they don't talk about video games usually at D23, but we've never really had many Star Wars video games. So under the Disney era, so will they talk about them? That'll be an interesting wild card, because Zero Company comes out in 2 weeks, and then Racer comes out in like 3 months or 2.5 months. So they're right around the corner. I'd be shocked if they don't have at least demos there for people to try. And I think that will be something you start to hear a little bit more information about the games, because they're gonna have demos and little booths popped up there. So I think that'll be cool. It'll be interesting to see if they talk about any more publishing, because it's like, weirdly, we didn't get any information about this Star Wars Marvel crossover at Comic-Con, but then they randomly drop an article about it leading up to D23, which usually has like no publishing information. So do they talk about publishing a little bit more? I think Star Wars is the wild card here, but if I had to bet, it's going to be Marvel focused, with Pixar second, Disney third, and Star Wars is going to be that, like, hey, next year's the 50th, guys. Maybe official announcement probably for the original trilogy re-release. I would imagine that's something they officially do. But yeah, those are our thoughts. Let us know in the comments. A lot of people talk about Pixar and Marvel and Disney. I think Ratatouille is definitely one of the most likely things they're going to announce. Live action one with Timothée Chalamet. I think that's something they're going to announce for sure. But yeah, thanks for watching tonight's impromptu stream, everybody. We are going to be doing a stream wrapping up D23. We'll let you guys know when that is. Assumedly, most of the information will come out Saturday, because that's usually the big panel day. But we're going to figure out, probably might do it the same time, like Tuesday next week. So we'll figure it out, and then we'll post a link. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream. Hopefully you enjoyed our review of Ninth Jedi. Make sure you check it out if you're interested. It's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in anime or Star Wars or anything like that. Nobody's watching it. So if you want more Star Wars stuff like that, make sure to go give it a watch if you're already subscribed to either Hulu or Disney Plus. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and comment below if you're watching on replay. Thanks for watching, and we will see you guys all next week.